The meeting will return to order. Good evening. It's Monday, March 1st, 2017. We're moving from an executive session into our regular meeting at this point. We are going to have a little bit of a change of order from what is normal here this evening, and I'm just going to explain that first to you. And it looks like it may change a bit more before we're done with it. So what's planned is that we have King County Council Member Claudia Balducci speak to us briefly, but I don't believe she's here yet. So we'll slot her in when she arrives. We have then put our consent calendar next rather than appearances next. And the reason we've done that is because we have a couple of items on the consent calendar involving Arch. And Arthur Sullivan has been kind enough to join us, but I understand, Arthur, that you have other places you need to be this evening. And so what we're going to do is cross our fingers. If they stay on consent, you'll be able to duck out. And if they don't stay on consent, I will make them the first orders of business immediately after the consent calendar. And once we're through that and Arthur can escape, we will then move to appearances, which will then proceed regular business. Tonight, I'm sorry, and the one other thing we will have is our police chief, who is here, and Chief, you're going to go before appearances or after appearances? I think I've got you down before appearances. Give us an update on the situation with the JCC and the bomb threat there. The other thing I would point out is that tonight we are having two public hearings. And so if you are here and wish to speak on other topics, you're welcome to do that during appearances. But if you're here and wish to speak about the moratoria, I would ask that you hold those comments until we get to the moratoria and speak as part of the public hearing. So there'll actually be a total of 3 opportunities to speak tonight. The first open, the second two specifically with regards to the moratoria. So with that, and Claudia, Councilmember Balducci not here as far as I can tell, we will go ahead and move to our consent calendar. Is there a motion to accept the consent calendar?
So moved.
I'd like to pull AB 5255 off.
Okay, so the second of the 2 items revolving around Arch. And okay, so we've got a motion to approve, and is there a second to approve, I guess, as changed with the removal of 5255? Okay, so moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll then go ahead and move to Agenda Bill 5255, which is the Arch 2016 Trust Fund recommendations. And Dan, since you asked that it be removed.
Just more question for Art. And first, thanks very much for coming out and doing everything you do for this region. It's amazing what Arch is capable of, has been doing over the years. So the council, and I think in a very important move, increased our funding allocation for Arch this year and again next year. So you're asking now for the $25,000, and I'd like to just understand where you see going ahead in order to, for the rest of the allocation for the remainder of the $64,000.
So Arthur Sullivan, Program Manager of Arch, and again, yes, thank you for the efforts that you have done in your budgets for the next 2 years. When we're coming to you at this time of year, we are only coming to you with funds that were allocated previous to this year. So the $25,948 is from previous year allocations from the council. Plus, you also receive some interest income, and then we've had some repayments. So for tonight, it's dealing with your 2016 and earlier funds. For the numbers that you have for the upcoming year, 2 years, the timeliness is actually pretty timely because you may recall, some of you have been involved, we've been looking at trying to do some siting of shelters on the east side, and those are getting closer and closer to sites being potentially identified and wanting to move forward. One of those may also include housing in addition to the shelter facility. Those are located in other cities other than Mercer Island. And so those we've been working on several years and may be coming up in this year or next year or both. And then in addition to that, King County has created, and you Councilmember Balducci may comment on it. The county has created a TOD fund, and there have been set-asides of that program for some areas of East King County, plus there's some at-large funds that they are trying to allocate in the next year or two. And so that is creating a lot of energy around several developments that could be relatively large, over 100 affordable units each. So we are looking at a number of projects in East King County over the next year or two that could be of a magnitude size that we're not used to, and we need to get pretty creative in local resources to try to match the county funds to do that. So those are a few things we're working on at this time with other cities and coordinating with other funds from other funding sources that we're always trying to leverage.
Do you see any opportunities, Arthur, for affordable housing on Mercer Island through Arch?
One of the ideas that there are some ideas that we have talked about. We don't like to get in front of staff or anything, but there have been talks over the years. Some of the ideas we're looking at is incorporating housing with park and ride and public transit facilities, and so that is an angle that, as you proceed forward, may be an opportunity. There may be other opportunities on properties that are already controlled that may have extra development capacity that are controlled by groups that are providing affordable housing. So that's another opportunity that may be out there. The timing on those, I'm not sure at this point, but those are some other. So there are potentially ideas on the island, but for those to move forward, we would be working with your staff to make sure that those are good fits with the community.
Anything else, Dan?
No.
Okay. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Nancy.
Arthur, can you, obviously Mercer Island increased its contribution. What about other members of Arch?
We are collecting information on that and actually want to provide a report to councils sort of showing the overall increases. Off the top of my head, I know of at least 4 jurisdictions that have increased. Bothell, Sammamish, Kirkland, and those are ones I'm sure on. We're just trying to double check. I don't want to put numbers out without confirming budget process. But yes, there are other jurisdictions who have been increasing their trust fund contributions. Plus, we have been having a conversation through the Arch Executive Board with council representatives to talk about the trust fund and how we can use it and make it as effective as possible. We are hoping to sort of wrap up the work with council representatives in the next 3 or so months and then come back and have a conversation with full councils later this year.
Okay. Anyone else? I would entertain a motion.
So I would move to approve the use of up to $25,948 from the city's share of the Arch Housing Trust Fund to support 2 projects, Imagine Housing 30 Bellevue, $16,211, and Imagine Housing Estera Park Block 6B, 9737, with conditions as recommended by the Arch Executive Board, and authorize the city manager or the administering agency of Arch on behalf of the city of Mercer Island to execute any related agreements and documents. I just
Second.
made all that up.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Arthur, thank you very much. You're released to go on to your next appointment. And we will move now to a report by our police chief, Ed Holmes. So come on up and...
All right, thank you. And again, for the record, Ed Holmes, your police chief. And I'm here just to give you an update on the threat we had at the Jewish Community Center. It was a week ago Monday. We had a bomb threat called in at the Jewish Community Center. And we had actually, unfortunately, sadly enough, we had expected this. There's been now, I think, a little over 100 of these such threats across the country. So we had actually met with the Jewish Community Center staff and staff from the French American School about a week and a half prior to that. We were going to do a drill actually scheduled for this Thursday in preparation for what we had forecast to be, excuse me, the threat. The threat actually came in about a week and a half sooner than we had anticipated. But from that, we actually had what we have in every drill. This time it was the real thing. We have lessons learned. So we are actually going to do another drill after we incorporate some of the lessons we learned even from this situation that we had a week ago Monday night. As far as the investigation goes, I wish I could give you some great big news. I can't. The arrest they made in St. Louis, we are not sure yet if that's the same person that made the calls here to our Jewish Community Center. I can say that we have one of our detectives assigned to the case, and he's working closely with the FBI, and they are working some potential interesting leads, and that's probably all the more I'll say about that at this point. We are also working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I'll say this, while I'm troubled by what happened, I'm also encouraged by a number of things, to include the overwhelming amount of support we got even that night and the next morning. We had our local partners, the Sheriff's Office, King County Sheriff's Office came with their bomb-sniffing dogs. We had offers of support from the State Patrol Chief. He called me that night, said, hey, anything you need. Representative Tana Sen from our community called, hey, what can I do? How can we help? Had offers of help from the Attorney General's office. I mean, people are very interested in this. And I guess the point in telling you that, the encouraging news, is to let everybody know that this doesn't and didn't just affect Mercer Island community. It affects the greater community. And people care deeply about this type of thing. And again, the amount of support we had, offers of help, was really heartwarming and very encouraging. And when I think about this and even some other things that have been going on, there are things that trouble me, and yet I'm also encouraged by things. And I think back to a few months ago, the vandalism I saw at the mosque in Redmond. That's the biggest mosque on the West Coast. I was really troubled by that, but then encouraged by the warmth and love that we received as chiefs when we came in there, a number of us, to give them our thoughts on safety and our express commitment to keep them safe. I think about the discussion in the community around immigration and some of the fear we had heard from community members around possible deportation, and will Mercer Island Police be the ones knocking on our door. That really bothered me, but I was really encouraged by what I received here, and I'll show you this. This was a letter of appreciation I received, and it's signed by 30-some community members expressing their thanks for the fact that Mercer Island Police, that we don't, local police in this area, we don't enforce immigration laws. And I updated our policy to reflect that as well. And I'm bothered by what I see across the country with expressions of hate and discourse, but very encouraged when I think locally about this proclamation, even signed a few months ago by our city council, re-expressing their commitment of diversity, equity, treating people fairly. So there are things that certainly bother me, while at the same time, if you look at it, it's pretty encouraging also. So I know we can get sort of lost on this dark road and look doom and gloom, but there's an awful lot of good that comes out of this too, and also a lot of opportunities. So this thing with the JCC, I see it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to strengthen our bonds with our partners. It's an opportunity to look for legislation and other ways to support ideals of equity and diversity and inclusion. And it's also an opportunity for all of us to speak to our kids. I have 2 teenagers, and they ask me questions about this. What happened? What's that about? So I'd say let's not miss this as an opportunity also to talk to our kids and loved ones about what's really important in life. So with that, I'll just say that your police department is 100% committed, as are our regional partners, in keeping this community safe, specifically our Jewish Community Center in this case and their neighbor, the French American School, and we will do and will continue to do whatever we can to keep this community one of the safest in the region. So, Mr. Mayor, that's my report.
Thank you very much for that. Council members, questions for the chief?
No questions, but I would really like it, Ed, and if you and the city manager and the city clerk could figure out a way of just taking the speech you just gave and getting it onto the website other than just buried in the council session, because that was great. I mean, what you said was unbelievably well done, and if we could have a link right on the front page of the website to that speech, I think it would be very, very helpful.
Thank you. I'm seeing nods over there, people who know technology better.
Big thumbs up from city manager. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll certainly second Councilmember Grouse's comments. It was very well said. I'd had a couple of citizens reach out to me through email and texting saying that this had left them very shaken. And so I think it's a time for comments exactly like yours, and certainly couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you very much for that. To the Deputy Mayor, who was holding down the fort while I was gone last week, you had some comments as well, and so thank you for that as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Calling Council Member Claudia Balducci. Okay, yeah, she may be. So we'll go ahead and move to appearances now. If she appears and it looks like appearances are running long, I may insert her into the middle of that. But with that said, let's go ahead and move to appearances where, again, this is the moment where anyone may speak to council on any issue you wish. If you're here to talk about the moratoria, please hold your comments until just a little bit later from now when we have our public hearings on those. 3 minutes. Please begin by introducing yourself, giving your address, and detailed rules of engagement on the back door, but they really just boil down to please be civil. Welcome.
Thank you, Chief Holmes. That was really special. Meg Lippert, 4052 94th Avenue Southeast. I'm speaking about the proposal to change the name of the Parks and Recreation Department. My questions are why and why now? The timing is suspiciously congruent with some council members' commitments to facilitate the building of a huge privately managed arts center in our public parkland. Citizens may be wondering if the purpose of this name change, wedding the arts with our parks, is to divert funds from our parks and ball fields to the arts, perhaps to help shore up MICA fundraising, and eventually to contribute to MICA's operating expenses. Lest I be accused of being too cynical, I will point out that there are plenty of arts activities that take place in our parks without the need to change the name for $60,000, and also without adding a clumsy and unnecessary tagline, celebrating community arts, parks, and recreation since 1960, which leaves me wondering what changed in 1960. Didn't Islanders celebrate all of these things before 1960 as well? No other department of our city government is burdened with the baggage of a tagline, and the tagline conflates activities that only overlap occasionally and peripherally. Music in the park, Shakespeare in the park, and other arts activities have been in our parks for years without needing the cachet of a name change or a tagline. And there are plenty of community activities that are not arts-related and are also take place in our parks, such as summer celebration and fireworks. In fact, most of the arts activities that Mercer Island Arts Council is responsible for have nothing to do with our parks. The Mercer Island Arts Council was established in 1985 with the mission to nurture, promote, and support high-quality cultural arts activities for the community. Their goals, as listed on the city website, are to advocate for the arts and to support the arts and arts programs. There's nothing about arts in the parks. The members of the Arts Council did not suggest the name change as far as I know, and according to the agenda bill, the City Parks and Recreation staff recommended to, quote, keep the department's name unchanged, end quote. So where is the pressure to change the name coming from? Who came up with this idea? As a reality check, I did some research on the 7 cities closest to Mercer Island. None of them have included arts in their parks departments, as you can see on the chart I gave to you. Maybe because, as in our city, arts activities are not confined to the parks. Arts, parks, and recreation are all thriving in our community without needing any tinkering with their names or any commingling of their budgets. Doesn't the City Council, our city government, and the Parks and Rec Department have enough to do without wasting time renaming or adding a superfluous and misleading tagline to a smoothly functioning department that already has a clear mission? Why are we distracting citizens and our city employees with an issue like changing a perfectly good and serviceable department name when really important issues, like sound transit, traffic congestion, and revising our city codes are demanding their time and attention? Dance is a form of arts that I enjoy, and I'm now leaving to attend a dance class at the JCC, which started at 7 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. And if folks who want to speak could queue up, that would be great, just to keep us moving along. Welcome.
Hi. My name is Sharon Gooding. I live at 5412 96 Southeast on Mercer Island. I am going to read something that I was just given a few minutes ago by Peter Struck, who cannot be here this evening. So I'm just reading what he is saying, but I do agree with it. On tonight's agenda is an update on Deputy Mayor Bertland's suggestion to rename the long-standing Parks and Recreation, or Parks and Rec Department, to Parks, Arts and Recreation. As outlined by Director Fletcher in his briefing paper, it's quite obvious it would be financially irresponsible to move forward with this proposal, and moreover, city staff believe the current name has strong brand recognition. However, I'd like to set aside the financial issues for a moment and review this proposal on its merits. First, I wondered, what do other cities do? A Google search suggests that an overwhelming majority of local municipalities, including Seattle, LA, New York, have a Parks and Rec department, not a combined Parks, Arts, and Rec. Most traditional parks-related activities are outdoors and convey the benefits of health. Conversely, arts-oriented activities are generally conducted indoors. Thus, a different policy and operational focus is brought forth. Secondly, I wonder about unintended consequences. For example, fundraising efforts become more complicated and less successful when you combine somewhat disparate activities. Is my money going to arts or parks? Recall when the United Way campaign changed their tactics and how they became much more successful in their fundraising when they allowed donors to designate to a specific cause. Similarly, cities that have separate but dedicated funding sources and focus generally bring better outcomes in terms of service to the public and their respective constituencies. Third, a recent survey by the National Association of Home Builders asked a large and statistically valid sample of homeowners about what community amenities they found most desirable. Parks were ranked number 2, right beyond living in a suburban setting. Arts or cultural-related activities did not rank in the top 10. Thus, while arts are clearly important in their own right, it can be considered a stepchild compared to parks. Fourth, to follow up on that last point, the percentage of people actively supporting the arts has been declining over the past 3 decades, as reported by the National Endowment for the Arts. This result is not only in terms of attendance, but also participation. A similar result is reported for school-aged children by the Child Trends Data Bank. So, if the evidence strongly suggests keeping the Parks and Arts Department apart, why was this suggestion made in the first place? Not stated, but it's not a stretch to wonder out loud if this is a first step on the part of certain council members to fund a pet project called MICA by looking to commingle and then commandeer such funds.
And I'll ask you to wrap up.
Okay, if that's the goal, please be transparent. And he says, to summarize, we do mean, this is no disrespect meant. Let's not be stupid here, he says, which is a character on the hit TV series Park and Rec highlights. So please vote against the proposed name change. Thank you very much. And he has 3 sources that he has cited here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Good evening. Good to see you, council and staff. I'm Jane Meyer-Brom, 7420 North Mercer Way. And as you know, Terry Mormon has retired after 26 years as executive director of the Chamber of Commerce. And as secretary of the Chamber Board, I'm inviting you and the community to stop by on Thursday from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Chamber office to thank Terry for her many years of service and to welcome our new director, Lori Guyven, who happens to be in the back row, right here, Lori Guyven. So you're all invited. And I'm also here to speak in favor of changing the name of the I-90 Outdoor Sculpture Gallery to the Greta Hackett Outdoor Sculpture Gallery. Last year and a half or so ago, I was a city council liaison to the Arts Council when the idea of changing the park name first came up. And years ago, I was editor of the Mercer Island Reporter when Greta Hackett came up with the idea of putting a sculpture gallery alongside I-90. And she researched the idea. She was the pioneer. She took hold of it, ran with it. She was persistent and passionate, tireless, and completely relentless. She would come into the reporter office about once a week asking for publicity and promoting support. She was completely tireless. She is single-handedly, in my mind, responsible for the I-90 Art Gallery. But the name was always confusing ever since it was opened. People called it Artway, outdoor gallery, outdoor art space, outdoor sculpture gallery, sculpture park. And in the same way, the park above I-90 the name of that park was confusing for many years. When it was completed in 1994, it was variously referred to as the Park on the Lid, I-90 Park, First Hill Lid Park, I-90 Lid Park, and finally, in 2013, the city renamed the park in honor of the single person most responsible for that park, Aubrey Davis. It took a while, but people now are referring to the park as Aubrey Davis Park. With use and signage, we got used to it, and the name has solidified. Without Aubrey Davis, there would be no I-90 Lid Park. In the same way, without Greta Hackett, there would be no outdoor art gallery. Putting a name on the park will acknowledge the importance of art and parks in our community. It will honor the passion and commitment of one leader and the key role that volunteers have in our community. I strongly support renaming the space the Greta Hackett Outdoor Sculpture Gallery. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen.
I didn't want to walk in front of the camera while she was speaking.
Welcome.
So, my children grew up on the island, and my son played
Introduce yourself
sports.
to begin.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nancy Hewitt Spaeth, 8320 Southeast 34th Street.
Thank you.
And my son played sports. He played tennis. He was on the tennis team at the high school. He played soccer, football, baseball, basketball, and used the parks a lot. My daughter, however, wanted to use the parks in a different way. She took classes and performed at the youth theater. She took dance classes and played the clarinet. So I fully support parks and arts, because then it takes care of all of our children. And I am fully behind Micah, absolutely 100%, because then we can include our children, both male and female. As well, I watched recently a huge program that showed facilities in parks all across the nation that gave the community places to have meetings or have other things for the children. Some of them even had daycare on the park. So there are places all over the United States that have buildings that accommodate the community, and I am really for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. Ira Appleman, 9039 East Shorewood Drive. I've complained before about the cronyism of this city council, how certain islanders are treated much better than others, receiving an unwarranted amount of public funds and or preferred treatment for their private purposes. The best current example of cronyism is the Mercer Island Center for the Arts, MICA. The most dangerous current trend is what I call crony creep. As you know, 2 years ago, Micah's footprint was much smaller than it is today. Then, at the retreat, without council permission, Micah presented a footprint that had expanded significantly towards the skate park. And that was just agreed to by the council. It's like Micah was running the council. In its latest expansion, Micah has expanded towards Farmers Insurance, taking up all of 32nd Street right-of-way. I've been unable to find any authorization for Micah to take over the 32nd Street end. The Memorandum of Understanding only authorizes Micah to propose use of the northwest corner of Mercerdale Park. The development application of the city makes the applicant sign that he either owns the land or has the owner's permission to use the land, but there's no evidence that Micah has the owner's permission to use the land, so Micah's application should have been rejected, but it wasn't. Again, Micah seems to be running this council, so if they say they're going to take over 32nd Street, apparently that may happen. Mercer Island City Code 19.09.070 on street vacations claims that a vacation is only possible if no public purpose is served by retention of the street, and there's plenty of public purpose for this street that may be used in the future. But that hasn't happened here. This is a very important potential street that should be opened up. Micah's misappropriation of Southeast 32nd seems to be the latest instance of crony creep that Islanders should strongly oppose and this council should disallow. As you know, Micah told the county that this council was giving them $2 million of capital and an unspecified amount of operational funds every year. I've heard all the denials and denials of the council, but in my experience with Micah, they're running the council, and if they say they're going to get $2 million in capital, they know that they're going to get it, and I think Islanders have to object to it because everything else Micah has said they're going to get from this council, they've gotten.
Thank you. Anyone else? Welcome.
Thank you. John Tiscornia, 5646 East Mercer Way. We've lived there for 45 years. I missed the council meeting in February, but I'm just here to say thank you to the council for unanimously voting 7-0 to take legal action and preserve the mobility and safety of the Mercer Island residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Tom Acker, Mercer, Washington. He already left. Oh, no, there he is. Chief Holmes. Unlike Councilmember Grouse, I was not unbelievably surprised. You and your team have just done an amazing job on Mercer Island, and you run a really good department. And very thankful that we have that kind of leadership at the city. Name changes. I'm not going to take a position on the Parks and Rec versus the arts. I think both are very, very important. But what does come to mind is just the administrative costs. And when Sharon Gooding was speaking earlier, it kind of resonated with me as like the value of separating out the two entities so that we can be very clear about the purposing of each. And I've worked for several large corporations in my life, and when you change charts or names, it creates administrative burden, branding issues, PR issues, all sorts of things. And right now, we can't afford to be a little loose with our purse strings. So I don't want to put too much pressure on that topic right now. But anything that you can do to be fiscally responsible and would be encouraged on my end. And that leads into the second topic that I wanted to bring up here. With funding getting so tight, there are a lot of needs within the community. Our youth and family service coordinators, school funding, all sorts of things are so important to the community. Mental health issues, the homelessness issues are now on both sides of the bridge, and that type of funding, and I think it's admirable that we're supporting Arch, but we have some issues at home that need to be resolved. And I was talking, as I was getting stitched up at Overlake yesterday, I was talking to the nurse there about the pressures on our children. And I would encourage you to put together a SWAT team of sorts that looks at funding issues in general. And where should the community be spending money? How should we be spending the money? And what should go to the voters for approval? And if you partition it out, the community will help you decide the priorities. And it's not an easy job, but there are a lot of competing priorities right now. And as you've shared, the lawsuit in and of itself is going to consume a lot of revenue. So please consider pulling together a team and of citizens, and very diverse citizens that can represent the population base. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Perfect timing, Claudia. So we've reached the end. I will close appearances then, and we will welcome King County Council member Claudia Balducci, if you are ready to roll.
I know you ready. Super
you sent me a
fast.
text saying you were scrambling from another function you were at to
I was,
be here. So.
yes, I bring greetings from the town of Yarrow Point, where I was speaking with them earlier. They wanted me to remind you, as if you need reminding, that in 1911, if things had gone differently, we could be all standing in a park right now. I don't know if that helps any, but there you go. The greetings from the town of Yarrow Point. Well, thanks for letting me come and speak to you tonight. I have made a habit in my just over 1 year now on the County Council of visiting with the cities that I represent, the 10 of them in District 6, at least once a year, to give a brief update on what's going on at King County, and so that you all are aware of what I'm working on your behalf. And I suppose it probably wouldn't hurt to at least touch upon Sound Transit while I'm here, since that seems to be the most important thing going on right now. But if you don't mind, I'll just give you a quick 5-minute overview of some of what's been happening around the county. It was a busy year, 2016 into 2017. I'll try to stress the things you care about, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about how we updated our comprehensive plan, because that doesn't impact the incorporated areas, and how we did marijuana land use zoning, except to say that I feel your pain to the extent you've had to deal with that. That was a fun project. But we did work a lot on county services like human services, the mental illness, drug dependency, sales tax measure that's been in effect now for quite a few years, was up for reauthorization last year. This is one of the major funding sources for all the human services that the county supports throughout the county. And the Best Starts for Kids implementation plan was adopted. That was a voter-approved levy in 2015. We started rolling the money out now with some early investments in youth and family homelessness prevention. This is a really cost-effective program that was piloted by LifeWire here on the east side. So using small amounts of flexible dollars to help people. So if a client needs a few extra bucks to make rent, usually you can't use most government funds you couldn't use that way, but it's so much cheaper than trying to pay for their services when they now have not paid the rent and are living in a car. So that worked out really, really well, and they're going to spread it now throughout the county. This year, we will be looking at reauthorization of the ongoing Veterans and Human Services levy. That's also been in place for quite some time, but it's up for a vote to reauthorize this year. And I understand, we haven't seen a proposal from the executive yet, but I understand that they're going to be looking at a focus on housing this year as they reauthorize that levy. I want you to know that because we've got these 3 major dedicated funding sources for human services that do a pretty good job of stabilizing that whole sector of the government, I asked and the council agreed to pass a motion that requires the Human Services Department to work on a combined performance metric kind of system for all of these, so identify what are we trying to accomplish and how well are we doing, and making that very public as we go forward so that people know that their money is doing what they hope to see it do. In the world of county transit, we updated the Metro bus system strategic plan and long-range plan. We will be working, and I want to thank Mayor Bassett, who sat on the Regional Transit Committee through those sessions. They were quite in-depth. And this year we'll be working on how we implement the long-range plan. It calls for a lot more bus service, a lot more frequent bus service, better connections, and if we can actually roll all of this out at the same time that Sound Transit is bringing their regional services online, people will find it really far easier to get around by transit, not having to have a car. But it's going to require some attention on how and when and where we roll out the new services, and that's some of the work that we'll be doing this year. And I hope you will continue to pay attention and join me in advocating for doing a fair spread of these services around the east side and the county, not just in sort of the most dense areas only. We are in investment mode in the bus service now. There's 300,000 new hours of bus service coming online. I'm aware that Mercer Island has an alternative service now, has the Mercer Island shuttle. We're going to be getting to the point where we want to evaluate that, see how well it's working, and whether it continues as is or whether we do something that works better or nothing at all. Okay. So last year, we adopted our biennial county budget. I was asked to serve with 3 of my colleagues on the leadership team. I was pretty pleased to do that. As a freshman, it was an interesting experience and a great way to learn about everything in the weeds at King County budget. It was a little bit of a jarring year. I think that you as council members probably recognize this, but for the public, you hear the county sometimes say things about how we don't have nearly enough money to provide our basic services, but then we turn around and we have money to pay for lots of other stuff. And that's a color of money issue, frankly. Our general fund, which is funded almost entirely by property tax, doesn't go up nearly as fast as the costs of the services in the general fund, and those are mainly public safety. But there are other things, and I'll talk about one of them in a minute, where there's these dedicated funding sources that exist in the law that they're doing just fine. So in the general fund, 70% of which, as I said, goes to jails, cops, courts, corrections. We were looking at the beginning of the year at a $50 million budget hole, and the executive proposed to cut the Marine Patrol and the air support units, which are regional services. I know Mercer Island also has a Marine Patrol, but I presume that we provide mutual aid to one another. The council was able to find a way with some help from the economy and one new revenue source that we are charging to the utility companies to put those services back, so they will remain in place. We are unfortunately had to cut work release. Our work release program will continue through 2017, but there's no funding for 2018, which can cause a real problem for people who have minor charges, don't need to be in jail, maybe DUIs or something, and then they can lose their job because we've got these mandatory sentences. You have to spend a night or 3 nights in jail. So we're going to try to find a way. We just set up a special committee trying to find a way to fund that program. It's very useful to the people who are in it. Okay, so next we have the jarring part. So there's this rental car tax. If you ever rent a car, you will find that you pay a tax on the bill, and by state law, most all of this money comes from the city of SeaTac because of the airport. Because the state law said that 50% of this entire funding stream had to go to pay off the bonds on the Kingdome. Now that those bonds are paid off, the state law says that they come to the county, but they can only be used for sports activities. So we have suddenly all this money around sports activities. You know, it's nice and everything, but it's almost all paid by people who are visitors to the area, so it's a nice thing we get to do. I will have a district grant process. We are able to make small grants for things like, well, anything really, capital, but scholarships for kids who can't afford to participate in programs. We're just putting together our process now for how we're going to do this, and we will let you know how to apply, because I guess I get to decide on some of it anyway. Like I said, these are going to be small $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 grants, but still, we can do some good with that. I was able to put a $50,000 request in for Mercer Island to help kick off the planning for the upgrade of the, I think it's going to be called the Aubrey Davis Trail now, so that was cool to be able to do that. And I set aside up to $2 million in bonded funds for a possible Eastside Aquatic Center. There's been just a really crying need for a regional pool. I know, you can't afford to fund your police, but we've got lots of money for sports. But that's the way our crazy tax system works, and if anybody ever wants to get to work with me on tax reform, I'm here to do it. Okay, solid waste remains an issue. Yes, I sort of saved this stuff. Solid waste remains an issue. We still have not closed the King County Solid Waste Plan, and we need to set that plan. I assume that folks from Mercer Island, to the extent they haul, go to Factoria, and that what happens with the City of Bellevue and with that plan is going to determine how much people pay and what the hours are, whether we have a new transfer station, whether your rates go up or not. So that's going to be a big plan that we're working on this coming year. A lot of that depends on whether Bellevue decides to stay out of the system or gets back into the system, and they're having those discussions now. You will have heard about the incident at West Point Treatment Plant. That continues. It seems to me the details haven't been really well reported, but what happened was, sorry if everybody's not eating, right? As the sewage flowed into the tank, some of the systems failed and it overtopped the tank, going down into all of the mechanics of the treatment plant and frying all the pumps, all the lights, anything with electricity. All of it was destroyed. So the reason why we are still not able to get that plant fully back online is because there are just thousands of different pieces of equipment that need to be replaced and repaired. It's going to take quite a while. It's very unfortunate, and we will be digging in deep to the details. I shouldn't have probably said that, but we're going to be digging into the details of why that happened so that we can make sure it does not ever happen again once we figure out what went wrong there. A large part of the problem is Seattle's combined sewer overflow system. Most places, presumably Mercer Island, have got sewage pipes. City of Seattle combines their sewage and their stormwater all in these big open systems. So when there's a storm surge, it rains and all that water comes rushing down the streets, it goes right into the sewage, all of it goes into the plant, and it suddenly raises the level of volume and speed with what we're doing, what we're trying to process. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Okay, so just a couple of words on transportation and sound transit. I have been following your studies carefully and your public comment. I watched your entire meeting that you had and all the stuff that people had to say, and that was very helpful to hear directly from the island residents about what their concerns are. I think it was reported that when the issue came to sound transit and we voted on how to respond, I was hoping that we could take this opportunity to try to change the story a little bit, maybe sit down and have a different kind of conversation and try to reach an agreement. That was not the way the board chose to go at this time. I can tell you that the reasons behind their vote to move forward with counter-legal action were because they just really want to keep the train project on time. They want to keep it moving. I voted not to sue. I voted to try to de-escalate. But we are where we are. I hope that we still have the opportunity to sit and meet together and try to talk about ways to address the island's problems. I want you to know that I have been doing everything I can to make sure that my colleagues and everybody really that I talk to around the region who cares about transit understands the problems for Mercer Island, that it's not just SOV access to the HOV lanes. I tried to explain to them about if anybody's community suddenly found their main access to their main freeway had been blocked to the vast majority of their drivers, they would have a problem too, and they would have other options because they are not an island. So that usually gets people to understand the magnitude of the problem at least a little bit. So there's a lot more to come on that, but I just want to commit to work with you and work with Sound Transit to try to find solutions that can work for the island and enable the light rail to be built. I want to see both of those things happen. Last but not least, so as we look around the region and we see light rail construction about to start, things like the South Bellevue Park and Ride that's going to be closed, the D2 roadway in Seattle that's going to be closed, ultimately buses in downtown Seattle having to come up out of the transit tunnel and onto the streets, the massive amounts of construction that are going to be going on in and around downtown Seattle, which will cause bottlenecks that, as we see, affect the rest of the region. 520 construction, 405 construction, lots of local street projects. It occurred to me to ask, who's coordinating all of this? And it doesn't seem like anybody is coordinating all of this. So I have my staff working on trying to pull together representatives from all around the lake to talk about the next 3 to 5 years of transportation mobility and how we're going to bridge that period of time between where we are now and all the growth and development and construction we're going to have to live through to get to the other side, where hopefully there'll be relief in the form of better options. But between now and then, we have to get through it. So I'll be sending an invitation to the city of Mercer Island and all the cities around the lake to join me sometime in early May, I think is the earliest we're going to be able to pull it together, to talk about what we can control, what we can't control, what we can do around mitigation, who we should be, frankly, lobbying to help us with this. So that is my report. Lots more to come. I would be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Council members, questions? Benson?
Well, thank you for coming here and sharing news about King County. I just have just a couple of questions. Do you have an idea of when the closure of the South Bellevue Park and Ride is scheduled for? We haven't heard for a while, and I'm just wondering whether or not you know.
The last understanding I had was that it was coming in 2 to 3 months or so, but that was about a month ago. They put the signs up at the Park and Ride to let people know that they should start thinking about alternative arrangements and to give them information about how to call and help figure out a different commute pattern. But I don't have a specific date yet at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
I could get it for you.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
I think the community would certainly like to know,
You bet.
at least have an idea.
Wendy?
Thank you for coming, Claudia. I really appreciate it.
You
Like
bet.
all the updates. This is getting in the weeds a little bit about that funding that's available for sports fields. We have a project up at Island Crest Park to do a lighting turfing project, and we have a little bit of money left to raise from the community, so wondering who we contact in your office to apply, really.
Just send me an email.
Love
Yeah,
to. Okay.
we're going to try to come up with a super easy application process, and it's district money, so we just get to decide what to do with it. So just give me a call or an email, and we'll put you in the line. I'm trying to put together an actual, not a really full-blown RFP grant process, but some kind of a call out to the public, so that folks who may not know me or I may not know will have an opportunity to ask as well, and it's not just sort of just people I happen to come across in my business, but beyond that, it's going to be prioritizing based on need and what we can be the most help with.
And the timing is?
I don't have a schedule. I've got my first meeting on how we're going to do this next week, so plenty of time.
Not Christmas, though.
Not Christmas. No, no, I know. In fact, if we're hoping to get it done sometime in the spring, and so we can sort of have the checks being cut in the summertime.
Construction period, yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah, you're welcome.
Other questions? Dan?
On South Bellevue closure, I'm sure, I know you're aware that none of the alternative lots that they've selected are on the 550. And which is, when we were told that back in December, I guess it was, we raised concerns as a council on what Sound Transit's plans are should a lot of those drivers end up deciding instead to park on Mercer Island rather than the alternative lots that Sound Transit has identified. So, and we had asked Sound Transit to come back to us with what their plans were to address that. First, will they be monitoring it, and second, how will they respond to that? And we're still waiting. So I don't know if there's some way of trying to light a fire under Sound Transit to get them to respond to us and tell them how they plan on dealing with that, but it would be very helpful.
Yes, and the challenge that we have is that all of the really potential parking lots that one could think to contract out and use along the 550 are things like churches and schools, shopping centers, daycares. I had them pull together all of the places they looked because I was very concerned about the outcome of where the lots were located and where they were not located along the 550, as you mentioned. And they seem to have done a fairly thorough job of reaching out to folks along the 550, but they were pretty much uniformly rejected by those places to enter into a contract for reasons like, this is a daycare, we need our parking for our clients, or the church has a school and they're not willing to commit that every weekday they can be full up with commuter cars. I'm not saying that we couldn't go back to those places and try to come up with something. Maybe we were asking to use the whole, making this up, maybe they were asking to use the whole parking lot and they should have been asking for 10 spots, you know. So I think the matter is not lack of trying or not wanting to answer. I think it's about going back and seeing if we can do better or differently with the people who have turned us down already.
And that part, and I support that. Our concern is if what happens is what we're afraid is going to happen, what does Sound Transit do next? Because that means that tens, dozens, hundreds of, or more than 100 Mercer Island commuters who now use the Mercer Island Park and Ride are going to be frozen out of that.
Yeah, so we're going to have to get creative. I know that Metro is already considering some kind of an option of sort of an Uber-like service where people could get a ride to the park and ride, and you know, we're going to have to get creative, and I think that we can do that. So I will take that as a question to go back to the board and to Sound Transit and Metro, frankly, because Metro can help as well, and ask them what sorts of creativity might be possible if it turns out to not work, if the plan doesn't work.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Debbie?
Actually, no question, but I did want to express my personal thanks for the dissenting vote with regard to Sound Transit litigation. I personally have appreciated your constructive and can-do attitude and carrying over the message that we, and I think the community shares, which is we do want to see the train continue on time, on budget, but equally we have the needs and the rights of this island to preserve. So
That's
thank
right.
you.
Thank you, and Deputy Mayor, you did a wonderful job presenting to the Sound Transit Board, and and representing the island, sort of assertively, appropriately, but also in a way that I think everybody really could understand sitting around that table, that if it were their community, they would feel no differently. That this isn't any kind of a special thing. This is what any city would need in their situation. So, good job. Thanks.
Anyone else? All right. So I would just, not a question, but I would just add my thanks. I've observed you in action as a council member and mayor of Bellevue, and now as a county council person, and you are incredibly hardworking. And we should all be appreciative, I certainly am, of all the effort and time you put in and the bazillions of meetings that you spend time in. As a member of the Regional Transit Committee, I've watched you go from new person to running that with a lot more engagement in it than is reasonable without putting a lot of time into it. And so thank you. Thank you for all you do, and thanks for being here tonight and walking us through the work that's going on at the county. And mostly thanks for your advocacy with respect to the issues we're wrestling with right now with Sound Transit.
It's my job. You're very welcome, and anything I can do to support the island in that or any other way in my job as council member, you know where to find me. I'm happy to help.
Indeed, we do.
Thank you for letting me take some time in your meeting tonight.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, we move now to regular business. The first item of regular business is Agenda Bill 5264. We are done with consent calendar, unless I've missed something. Okay, so this will be a public hearing for a moratorium regarding development of construction activity within the I-90 right-of-way portion of the public institution zone. The way this is going to work, before we have the public hearing portion of this, our DSG Director, Scott Greenberg, will give us a presentation, and then we will open it up for public input. So, Scott, you're on.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Very quick presentation, just for the record. The moratorium subject to the public hearing tonight was adopted February 13th of this year. It's ordinance number 17-05. That ordinance established an immediate 6-month moratorium on non-highway uses of the I-90 right-of-way. And I'm summarizing and paraphrasing what's in your agenda bill, so there's more language than that in your agenda bill. The purpose of the moratorium was really twofold. One was to allow staff and the community, planning commission, and council to study the appropriateness of having non-highway uses, such as light rail, in the I-90 right-of-way, which currently is not allowed under our zoning code. Second purpose is to consider any appropriate regulations and maybe mitigation measures to avoid traffic congestion created by these non-highway uses, and to facilitate adequate provisions for parking and transportation, also related to the non-highway uses. State law requires, since you adopted the moratorium as an emergency, requires that you hold a public hearing within 60 days of adoption, so you really had till around April 13th to do it. You're doing it tonight. The purpose of the public hearing is for you to receive testimony, number one, the advantages or disadvantages of the moratorium, number two, the adopted findings of fact in Ordinance 17-05 that are supporting the moratorium. And just for the record, we've already received, or actually you've already received several comments via email, one from a private citizen, and then an email that contained 6 or 7 letters from different PTAs around the island supporting the moratoria. Important point is there's no action required of you tonight. At the end of the public hearing, you can simply say, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next agenda bill. If you want to change anything related to the moratorium, such as the findings or anything else, then you would need to have some discussion and then have appropriate motions or direction to staff, that sort of thing. But if after you hear from the public you're fine with the moratorium the way it is, you can just move on to your next item, which is another moratorium.
Excuse me. I just wanted to note for the record that we also did receive, at the end of day today, a letter from Senior Legal Counsel Steve Sheehy on behalf of Sound Transit in opposition to the moratorium.
Thank you. I didn't have a copy of that in front of me. So, Your tentative schedule to get through the actions that you adopted the moratorium to do is shown on the screen. This is also in the agenda bill. Bottom line is you need to adopt something by August 11th or extend the moratorium at that point. Hopefully you won't have to do that. And given this schedule, Planning Commission's very busy working on residential development standards right now. So it was a bit of a trick to try to put this in amongst that project. Generally, the work on what we're calling these P-zone code amendments would really start after the Planning Commission sends you their recommendation on the residential development standards. There will be staff work going on behind the scenes with us and our legal counsel to prepare these ordinances, but the Planning Commission really isn't going to get into major discussion until May. So there's plenty of time for the public to be involved. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions, or you could move right to your public hearing.
So, questions, council members? Seeing none. Okay, well, we will then open. Carrie, are there any special words I need to use other than just we are opening a public hearing at this point? Okay. With that, we are open. And same general rules apply. Please introduce yourself, give your address, and you'll have 3 minutes. So, Carv?
No, sir.
No?
Discretion, thank you.
All right. Ira?
Ira Appleman, 9039 East Shorewood Drive. So I'm not sure exactly what can be considered based on this. It didn't seem like during this, I think there should be a moratorium and we should have regulations within the P-zone, but it wasn't clear to me based on the moratorium document that it was only limited to transportation. But in any case, in the 2000 to 2004, there was an I-90 steering committee that met in this room. I think it was Wednesday mornings, and I attended all those meetings. And the steering committee, which was the partners in the memorandum agreement, they considered 3 projects. They considered the center lanes, which they considered, which I'm not talking about now. They considered the park and ride, which I'm not considering right now, and they considered the transit station. And the partners decided that they were very interested in the center lanes, and they stayed involved in the center lanes. But with respect to the park and ride and with respect to the transit station, they said that what happens there would basically be up to Mercer Island. And so, take the park and ride. Mercer Island decided that there wouldn't be 4 floors. Sound Transit was willing to put in 4 floors, but Mercer Island had a process which involved this council. And in that process in the neighborhood didn't want a bunch of cars coming in from all over the place. And so Mercer Island decided that it would be limited to 2 floors. And that's why it was 1 floor, now it's limited to 2. So the parking was about doubled in it, but that was Mercer Island's decision. It wasn't Sound Transit's decision. And with respect to the transit station, I don't think Sound Transit has fulfilled its responsibility to involve Mercer Island. We haven't had the same process to decide what it is, and Mercer Islanders haven't been that involved. It seems like we've been using the regular Sound Transit process, which is not very involved. And people, I think, are grumbling about what they've got there, and it is completely in the I-90 right-of-way in the P-zone. And so, to the extent possible, I'd like to revisit that design within the regulations that we write for the P-zone, because Sound Transit has not fulfilled its responsibility. I mean, the I-90 steering committee was the one that made the decisions, and remember, Sound Transit wasn't a part of that, but with the 2000 amendment, Sound Transit was invited to be part of that process. And I think that we need to hold Sound Transit to its commitments, and Mercer Island needs to be a lot more involved in what that transit station looks like.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. Sarah Smith, 7109 84th Avenue Southeast. I wanted to thank you for fighting hard on behalf of the Islanders' mobility, safety in schools. your unanimous vote, 7-0, to take legal action to preserve mobility and safety of Mercer Island residents, combined with these ordinances, allows Mercer Island to develop transportation concurrency and mitigation plans that are an integral part of any transportation planning process. I also wanted to look at the timeline, and I know that we only have 6 months. If it was possible to front load some of the activities earlier in the schedule, including citizen input, and to also tie that into some of the other residential development discussions going on, I think that would help with some of the transportation concurrency efforts, whether that's the timing of lights or looking at intersections. So I would encourage you to do that. I also wanted to submit for the record that we have over 2,700 citizens who have signed the petition to maintain mobility and transit options on I-90 that you previously saw. Thank you for everything you're doing on behalf of Mercer Island.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Hillary Benson, 7344 Island Crest Way, and I'm here today to also support the City Council's passage last month of the 2 moratoria related to permitting the projects in our I-90 right-of-way. And I support them because I'm one of those 2,700 people who've expressed concern about the adverse impacts of the project that have gone largely unaddressed by Sound Transit so far. In a statement on Sound Transit's website, CEO Peter Rogoff writes that it's highly regrettable that the City of Mercer Island is now attempting to delay the project in mid-construction. And it bothers me and a lot of us, I believe, because it's as if Sound Transit had no role in the timing here. You know, big agency behemoth, one would argue, of an agency that's had years to do right by our community and has chosen not to. So I wanted to go back to something. This is back to 2009, and this is a quote. "We will set priorities, build partnerships, and make real progress. We'll do it by working together, by listening to each other, and driving solutions that are thoughtful and lasting. We will be ambitious, but level-headed. We'll be unafraid to stand up for what is right and pragmatic about minimizing the disruption that change brings." So minimizing the disruption that change brings is what I especially want to focus on. That quote is from the inaugural address of King County Executive Dow Constantine, who, as you all know, was the chair of Sound Transit's board until just recently in January. He was a big advocate for his own home community of West Seattle, spoke often about the need for preserving character. And it's something that my husband and I respected. We used to live in West Seattle when our kids were younger. Appreciating the willingness to fight for his neighborhood. And now we all are in the position of appreciating whatever fight you also can keep up on our behalf as well. Like Sarah, just seeing the schedule for the first time, I do also hope that there might be some slight reprioritizing. Not to say that the residential issues are not as important, but because of the June 1st deadline. And again, just thanking you, because it's not an easy task to go out there and possibly be looking at big legal bills. I know it's stressful, but we do appreciate your willingness to do this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Welcome.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Buckley, and I live at 15 Brook Bay here on Mercer Island. I also want to thank the council for standing up for the citizens of Mercer Island. I know it was not an easy decision, and I know it will be expensive, and I appreciate that you are taking this as seriously as you are. I'm also here to express my support for the moratoria, and I am very much in favor of the revocation of the shoreline permit. And we, the citizens, thank you for taking this, again, very seriously. Closing down 2 lanes of a federal highway, whether it is HOV, express, or not, for some 6+ years is ridiculous and reckless. Losing 3 exit entrance ramps and SOV access for our main artery is beyond detrimental for an island. It is dangerous and reckless to then not have adequate replacement for these. We are an island. Even though Dow has gone on the record saying we are not, we are. Limited access off and on. How is this allowed? How is this legal? Running an island without adequate EMS services. No trained 24-hour paramedic available. No urgent care. No ladder fire truck. This is negligent. No concern for our schools, businesses, and residents for the extreme stress caused by having to drive a dangerous corridor of federal highway with the implementation of R8A, which will have narrowed lanes, reduced and sometimes no shoulder through dangerous old tunnels that allow fuel trucks, semis, soon more buses, school buses, and the rest of the public. This, again, is negligent. Safety concerns still exist for the efficacy and long-term viability of placing light rail on a floating bridge. A 2001 study commissioned by Sound Transit strongly recommended against it. Sound Transit fired that firm, BWR, after they released this study. I could go on. More about the bus turnaround, lack of adequate park and ride, no reliable bus shuttle on the island, and a humongous rail station with very little citizen input. These will all cause even more increased congestion and lack of access for islanders once this is all built. Getting into these issues only muddies the water and makes for a dismissal of our grave concerns. My concern is, and will always be, safety. Safety first, and accountability for our safety, and a clear understanding that this entire conversation is not about light rail anymore. It is about safety and access. Access to a federal highway for the entire East Side corridor, and access for an island's residents to their only way on and off of this island, the most populated freshwater island in the United States.
And I'll ask you to wrap up, please.
This is what we are talking about. Mercer Island and the region that uses I-90 daily. Please take this seriously. I appreciate the time to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Tom Acker, my address is on the record. Do want to say thank you for voting to support the moratorium and embrace the citizens' response overwhelmingly. As many of you know, this has been a journey to get us where we are today. I would hope that as we go forward, we have a very thoughtful approach. Everything that you touch related to the town center, I-90 light rail project, the transit station, the bus routes, everything is interrelated. R8A. And I'm not sure that you can actually successfully decouple the issues. And that's why you need a holistic solution. So I would strongly encourage you as you go through this journey, and the citizens are fully behind it. One, don't go in half-heartedly. If you're in a fight, you got to be in the fight to win it. And this is probably a horrible analogy, but I don't know if any of you have been in a bad relationship before, but I think that Sound Transit has abused us. We've asked them for facts, we've asked them for data. I'm a big fan of database solutions and facts and data. They told us we couldn't get the park and ride. Well, now maybe we can. They told us, I mean, they've been telling us so many different stories over the last few years that at this point we just really need to dig in our heels, advocate for the community, and look at what the art of the possible is. And part of that really might be looking at R8A. And part of the negotiations, if we're negotiating or arbitrating, might be when the R8A is ready to go, instead of shutting down the center lanes permanently for the construction of the light rail system, look at what the unintended consequences or the adverse impacts might be. And then also considering the safety factors that haven't been addressed. And so if you take a 6-month look and study and start to change traffic patterns, I'm willing to embrace the idea that R8A might be a successful solution if you can mitigate the safety concerns. But one propane tank rolling over could blow the whole thing up, and that's a horrible pun. But we really, really need to look at what the impact of R8A is first, and then get into the discussion on the moratorium. So you have the citizen support. There are multiple groups that are coalescing behind the scenes. And again, as always, if there's anything that we can do to help, please let us know. And thank you for taking the action that you have. But drive to a project plan, hold them accountable, because I've seen Dan in here asking for information several times, and they never bring it back. It's like you're talking to yourself, and that's the bad relationship part. If you keep expecting, asking the same question and expecting a different result, it's the definition of insanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, welcome.
Hi, my name's Kara Perla, and I live at 5320 West Mercer Way. I'm here to support the moratorium of the closure of the I-90 Island Crest Way entrance. I don't have anything fancy or profound to say, except for I'm speaking from my heart and the concern of the safety of my children that take the bus every day and walk on West Mercer to catch the bus. I'm afraid that with the I-90, the Island Crest Way entry, that it will funnel drivers down to West Mercer Way, where it's already a racetrack, if you ever have walked on West Mercer Way. And I'm just urging you guys to think about the safety of our children that walk that every day and every night. So I'd like to thank you for all your hard work. And
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, with that, I'll close this public hearing. There will be another one shortly. Council, it comes back to you. Scott has told us there is no further action the council needs to take at this point, unless there's a desire on the part of the council to change anything about the moratorium. Julie, did you have anything you wanted to, you sort of looked on the verge of saying something, if you've got, sorry, my lip reading's not very good. Okay. Benson.
We've heard a couple of citizens ask about taking another look at the schedule, and Scott, I guess, so perhaps maybe we should take a look at it. I know obviously the Planning Commission is really busy, obviously with the Residential Development Code, and so I don't know if it's possible to, as they were saying, to basically try to front load some of these things, but
yeah, I really don't think it's possible. We've looked at it. The only way we could bring some of these to the Planning Commission earlier would be if we had direction from council to flip-flop the residential development standards with this work. So in other words, make this the higher priority over the residential development standards. Commission's just about to get into looking at the actual regulations for residential standards at their meeting next Wednesday. So even we're planning an extra meeting on March 29th, so there's the 15th, 29th, and 2 meetings in April, and then a meeting in May. So that's 5 meetings for them to wrap up all their work on the residential development standards. Plus March 29th, we're going to have policy discussions with them on the issues related to the moratoria, just to kind of give them the background that they're going to need for their future work. So that's my response. We looked at try to get these things earlier, and that's the best we could do at this point, without burning out the Planning Commission, I think.
Other questions or comments? Dan?
No, I think that it's when we did the new schools, one of the critical issues was going back and looking at the P-zone and coming up with new standards for the P-zone insofar as it affected the new schools. And I think we're very much in the same situation now with light rail and sound transit and everything that's basically planned for this P-zone. In that what we have determined, particularly based upon some recent actions that impact light rail, is that the P-zone as we now have it constituted in the center roadway does not work. And it, as our staff has determined, it may not even be worded in a way that would permit light rail to exist in the center roadway. And even if that turns out to be the case, the fact of the matter is that what we require in there was never drafted to address light rail. So whether or not it's even permitted in the P-zone, or whether, even if it is arguably permitted, the fact is that we have nothing for this P-zone that provides the type of safeguards that the community requires in order to ensure that our zoning code actually satisfies its purpose. So I think exactly like we did with the schools, this is what we should be doing as a council and as a city, and making sure that the P-zone is modified so that it can in fact accommodate light rail. As has been pointed out in the motion that we passed, and has already been pointed out by staff in prior reports, light rail is an essential public facility. No one should think that we can prohibit it, nor is there any intention on the part of the council to prohibit it, but we can regulate it insofar as certain community impacts through our zoning code, and that's the sole purpose of this exercise, and I fully support it.
Anyone else? Seeing none. All right, we will bring this agenda bill to an end and move on to Agenda Bill 5265, public hearing for moratorium regarding transportation concurrency and siting of essential public facilities. And again, back to Scott Greenberg. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do a shorter presentation. A lot of what I said for the first presentation will also apply here. All of this information is in your agenda bill. Moratorium related to transportation concurrency and the need to have the city write some regulations for essential public facilities was adopted the same evening as the last one. And it's Ordinance 17-06. This moratorium placed an immediate 6-month moratorium on projects that cause transportation level of service to decline below our adopted standards, and then also a moratorium on the siting and development of any essential public facilities on the island. The purpose of the moratorium is to allow staff, community, planning commission, and council to actually work on ordinances to deal with those two issues. Those ordinances are required by the State Growth Management Act, and we need to have those adopted in our code. The purpose, again, of the public hearing is to hear from the public on the moratorium, the adopted findings of fact. I'll reference the same pieces of correspondence that were referenced in the last presentation from the PTAs, from private citizen, and also from Sound Transit. Again, no action is required unless you would like to make changes. Any statements you'd like to make regarding the moratorium to add into the record would be fine also. And similar schedule, just a couple of different dates. I think we have May 3rd in there as discussion of transportation concurrency. So the last slide I showed you with the schedule had discussion of the P-zone uses also occurring on May 17th with citing of essential public facilities. Those are both use-based and they sort of fit well together. So May 3rd we are actually going for transportation concurrency. I think transportation concurrency is going to be the most complex of the 3 different ordinances we will be working on, so we wanted to devote adequate time on May 3rd for the Planning Commission to spend the majority, if not their entire meeting, talking about transportation concurrency. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Questions, Council? Debbie, did you? No. Okay, Dan?
So I'm curious, Scott, what based upon what other jurisdictions have done, what do you see as the approach that staff will recommend to the Planning Commission on how to achieve concurrency? Is there a standard way that jurisdictions deal with this?
There are several different methodologies. We're just starting to dig into what those are and looking at how they might apply here on the island. The fact is that the whole island has to be covered by a concurrency ordinance, but how you implement that can vary. So, for example, you may have a different way of measuring concurrency in the town center than you do in the rest of the island, or you can exempt. Well, exempt's not the right word. You can say that certain intersections, if you choose an intersection-based concurrency program, certain intersections, you're just going to accept a degraded level of service and not really require that intersection to be concurrent, if you will, with certain standards. There's more detail around those things, but that's why I'm saying it's probably the most complex, is in that there are more options, I believe, for how we might do that program. And we're literally this morning, we're just starting to look into that.
Other questions for Scott? Seeing none, I will go ahead and move to the public hearing portion of this. So we are again open for public testimony regarding this moratorium.
Carrie, is it appropriate? My guess is that most of the people who talked intended their remarks to apply to both ordinances or both moratoriums.
Please come on down.
I knew I had another chance, so I waited.
And before you begin, though, Carrie, did you want to tackle Dan's question?
Well, I would just say that I wouldn't want to make that assumption, although if, people want to make that known to the city clerk, then we can certainly capture their comments for the earlier ordinance into this one as well, just for efficiency's sake.
And so that I mention that because if there's people who are still here who spoke and want to make sure that their comments also apply to this moratorium, they don't have to repeat their comments, but they could probably just get up for 2 seconds and say ditto or something like that.
Or they could indicate with a show of hands, just something for the clerk to be able to know rather than us make an assumption.
So let's take the public testimony that occurs, and when I get through that, I'll see if there's others left at that point who wish to signal that they're not speaking but want their that their comments to apply to both. So with that, welcome.
Hi, my name is Cher Hiskin. I live at 8806 Southeast 78th Street on the south end of the island, and my comments do apply to both moratoria. I actually wrote this to speak to Claudia Balducci, but I decided that I'm going to read it anyway. I was hoping there might be something in it she could use. I've lived on Mercer Island for 30 years now. My kids went all through the schools. I have substitute taught in the schools and worked for 15 years in commercial printing. Like many islanders, I probably couldn't afford my own house today. I love the feeling of community here, in the schools, at the beach club, at the Straum Jewish Community Center, and in the downtown businesses. I am alarmed at the current plan for how to deal with Island I-90 West access, and I fully support the moratoria. As I understand it, we will lose rational SOV access to westbound I-90 due to a judgment by the Federal Highway Administration. Why Sound Transit and WashDOT are willing to accept this judgment is beyond me. Being regional partners means watching out for reasonable outcomes for all constituents, not just those seeking to get to Seattle from the east side. I would like to give a glimpse of my community life in downtown Mercer Island. First, there's Dr. Gary Marshall, our veterinarian at Island Cats. A number of years ago, when our dog was injured in the parking lot at Lake Ridge, my daughter loaded him into her car and in great distress drove him to Dr. Marshall's. Island Cats is naturally cats only, but Dr. Marshall cleared a room, tended to Chewy, and he and his staff stayed with my daughter until my husband could get there. I am grateful still for his kindness to my daughter. I shop at True Value, where I pet the resident Australian Shepherd when I walk in. I've been through 3 Australian Shepherds and a relocation with True Value. Victor at Wall Street Clothiers lengthens all my sleeves, and he recently redid the seams on my son's vintage teddy bear so that my granddaughter can enjoy it. If SOV access to I-90 West off Island Crestway is denied, the ability of Mercer Island residents to visit the Central Business District will suffer greatly. Cars fanning out through downtown Mercer Island will clog virtually all downtown streets with lines of idling motors. Businesses will be inaccessible, and I believe the downtown core will die on the vine
for lack of customer access. Drivers avoiding downtown will divert and pass elementary schools and run through residential neighborhoods, impacting the safety of our youngest students. While nationwide, we bemoan the loss of community and its devastating effects, here on Mercer Island we have a strong community, yet Sound Transit and WashDOT seem not to value it. All I can say is that we Mercer Island residents value it greatly, and we feel let down by our regional partners. In my opinion, there is no acceptable alternative to continued SOV access to I-90 West from Island Crest Way. Even the word mitigation is out of place.
I'll ask you to wrap up.
I'll talk faster. There is no mitigation that can neutralize the resulting extreme traffic catastrophe in the central business district. Stated simply, our downtown community will be destroyed. I feel that Sound Transit and WashDOT have not adequately considered what their plan is taking away from our community, and I would appreciate any support that Claudia and King County Council can give us in helping them to see that we are not merely a pass-through for their greater transportation goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Sarah Smith. I spoke earlier. Again, looking at the calendar here, the schedule, and knowing that many of the tasks on both work plan will be aligned and they'll be happening concurrently, I don't understand the earlier comments that some of these work plan items can't be joined. I'm also wondering when the clock begins ticking. On the prior slide, it said there were 60 days until a public hearing. And when I look at this schedule here, it shows the public hearing on June 7th, which to me is greater than 60 days. But I suppose it depends on when you start the clock on that 60 days. So I'd like some kind of understanding of that. I would also like to understand what impact the moratorium has, what the public process is, and the impacts on Sound Transit. When I drive to work, I still see construction going on in the center lanes. And I don't know if the moratorium had to be presented in one meeting and approved in another. Assuming it's approved today, does that mean construction in the center lane stops? What is the City Council's expectation? Is there expectation that construction in the center lanes will stop as soon as this moratorium is approved and passed? So those would be my outstanding questions, again, related to the schedule, and then also your expectations of Sound Transit in seeing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Scott, you want to try and tackle at least one of those questions right now?
I think I can probably tackle both of them.
Okay.
So the first one is the 60 days for the public hearing was for the hearing tonight. It's 60 days from adoption of the moratorium, which happened on February 13th. So there is no deadline for a public hearing for the actual ordinances that will be written. The only, I'll call it a soft deadline you have, is the expiration of the current moratorium, which is August 11th, I believe. And at that point, you could extend the moratorium if you needed to continue working on the different ordinances. And then, and again, part of the reason we're not combining all these together is the Planning Commission is the group that's going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting on these. And I know from working with the Planning Commission quite heavily over the past couple of years, they often take a lot of time to really chew over these issues and talk about and debate these issues. So we're trying not to put too much on their agendas. We can't have a lot of large items on their agendas because then they might rush through items and not think them through fully, or they just get burned out and are not making good decisions at midnight if their meetings go that long. The second issue is, I believe the speaker was talking about current construction in the center roadway, and that has to do with the R8A lane configuration. It does not have to do directly with light rail. So the moratorium would not affect that construction. That's being done by WashDOT for highway purposes.
If I understood correctly, and maybe I didn't, there was the question was, would this stop the coming light rail construction? And I think the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
It's intended to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Scott, can I actually ask you a follow-up question that would be helpful for me, maybe helpful for some people in the audience? My understanding right now is the work that's being done to prepare for R8A is being conducted by WashDOT, and that the handover of the center roadways does not happen until June 1st, at which point Sound Transit takes it over for light rail. So there's probably some important distinction between WashDOT and R8A versus Sound Transit and light rail that happens on or maybe around June 1st. Is that a fair understanding?
I think that's correct, and that probably has more to do with the first moratorium, which was the uses in the P zone, because the R8A lanes are being built for highway purposes, which is an allowed use in that zone. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, back to public testimony. Welcome.
I guess I'll formally say ditto, so it's on the record for the second one. But I also really like the speaker before, Sarah, and her comments really resonated with me. And I believe that we'll probably get a solution to the access to westbound I-90, and I'm predicting it's going to go the hot tolling lane way in the future. But I do think that there's a really interesting point here, and when you look at the traffic studies, about half the 1,200 cars per hour, 1,100 cars per hour enter on the north end. And that's not necessarily the Island Crest Way access. So there's a large population north of 40th in the Island Crest Way on-ramp that will have to come back up Island Crest Way, pull a U-turn to get on and go westbound on I-90. And the reason that's important is this all goes back to data analytics. And as we talk about the moratorium, I think we need to talk about what the spirit of public transportation is intended to cover as part of the negotiations. There's the legal side and then there's the negotiation side. And as many of us have said for years now, it's absolutely unfathomable to me as a supporter of public transportation that we are encouraging people to drive 405 northbound, 405 southbound, I-90 westbound, and Bellevue Way westbound to drive to Mercer Island, to park on the island, to take the last mile into the city. It just doesn't make sense. So as part of the fight, I think that whatever you can do to stop all aspects of the construction of light rail until we have reasonable solutions need to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Welcome.
Ira Appleman, 9039 East Shorewood Drive, and my earlier comments were on the first moratorium, and these comments are on the second moratorium. I've been asking for years for the council to take concurrency more seriously, that we needed an ordinance, and I appreciate that now they're doing it. The project, the WashDOT Sound Transit project, is, I think, the greatest disaster, would be the greatest disaster to Mercer Island transportation in the 20 years I've been here. And the EIS that they did not cover that. To my best knowledge, they did not cover that. The moratorium, in order to be legal, as I understand it, cannot be directed just to one project, but has to include all projects that might increase traffic in the town center. And so I want to make sure that you include a project like MICA, which is adding traffic to the town center, because if you don't do that, WashDOT and Sound Transit have plenty of money, and they have lawyers to look at this, and they would be able to challenge your action based on that. I'm particularly concerned about Section 3C. If a development is not subject to transportation concurrency ordinance, the development may be contrary to the best interests of the residents of Mercer Island. I certainly agree with that, but it applies to Micah. And 3F, allowing development to continue before the City Council can fully adopt new or revise existing regulations for such matters, including a transportation concurrency ordinance, could result in irreversible damage to the city and would be contrary to the Growth Management Act and state law. I think that all applies to Micah, that in their latest corrections to their transportation study, they did not include the transportation information that was provided 2 months earlier by KPG that showed what was happening in the town center based on future projects, which should have been included in their transportation study. So I think Micah also could decrease these intersections with all the other traffic below level C, or whatever the standard is for that. And so therefore I think Micah needs to be included in the moratorium. It should have already been included. Processing their application should have stopped on February 13th. And if it's not stopped, I think that would be a basis for WashDOT and Sound Transit to challenge the moratorium and maybe overturn the moratorium completely because it wasn't being applied equally.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, mine is, excuse me, John Tiscornia, 5646 East Mercer Way. Mine is just a question of process. Staff says, you know, we have this residential zoning or what, I don't know all the details, so this is the high level and point. But staff says we can't get these things front loaded because we've got other things on the agenda that we're working on, the process that relates to residential or something like that. It would seem that this issue that we're talking about, where the public is heavily involved, as is the council, ought to be made a priority by the staff and the planning committee. You know, being in business, I recognize a lot of crises, a lot of late nights and working, but it seems with the urgency of this, that the council should ask and staff should reevaluate these priorities, not just because we're in a linear process, but we should take a look at perhaps putting this forward and putting the residential one on the back burner. Because several times tonight, the public has brought that up, and I know in business that we had a customer that's saying that we'd look at the priorities. I don't understand the detail, but I do understand the concept. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Elizabeth Buckley, I spoke earlier. I will also say ditto for my earlier comments. I also wondered if the council members can speak to us on whether our proper EMS response channels have been contacted to know what R8A is going to look like. I sent an email to our 911 dispatchers, the executive director. They've not fully vetted this. They did not know that there are going to be no shoulders on the bridge that meet federal standards. They're going to be 2, 4, 6, and 8 inches. So if you go out and measure your car, you'll see that your car is bigger than 2, 4, and 6 inches or feet. So my understanding is when we have accidents on that bridge, then without adequate shoulders, when a car disabled will then have to get over onto what shoulder, I'm not certain of. and then there will be cars that then have to try to get around that car that's disabled. So I wonder what conversations we're having as we're trying to deal with the impacts for the island on how first responders will make it here, how will they make it to accidents on the bridge, how will they make it to accidents in those tunnels once that restriping occurs and we have 4 lanes. So I'm seeing that we're doing some of this commissioning of different concurrency issues we have, but I don't really see anyone speaking to our EMS response times and what we lack on this island to properly address our safety issues for our citizens. And it concerns me when I don't see that being addressed, and I'm not sure how you all feel about it, but it really seems like we're not addressing it at all. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none. We'll come back to this question that was asked of if you would like to show hands suggesting or signifying that your earlier comment should be applied to this moratorium as well as to the first one. We'll make note of that somehow. I'm not sure how our clerks are going to do that, but...
So I see Hillary Benson, Tom Acker, and Sarah Smith.
Okay.
We'll note that in the minutes.
Very good. Thank you. All right. We come now back to the council. Is there any council conversation, comment, question? Wendy.
So, Scott, I wonder if you could speak to how this action relates to any other projects that might be planned in the town.
How it affects other projects?
Or how it could, or which project?
How it could? Well, if there's a project, if there's a single project that trips the threshold for level of service, then it would fall within the moratorium. So let me give you a very simple analogy of a glass of water. The glass of water is a certain size, and if one project makes that glass of water overflow, then that project is subject to the moratorium, and we would not be able to process the application or accept the application, except I think we exempted for design review would be the one thing. But a project that just adds a little bit to that glass could still proceed forward at this point. They may still be subject to concurrency, for example, later on, if their building permit is not vested by the time a concurrency ordinance comes in. That's later down the line. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Seeing none. Benson, no? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Scott. And
Thank you.
we then are concluded on this agenda bill. We're going to move now to Agenda Bill 5267, which is our I-90 Loss of Mobility Status Report. Julie, you're on for this one?
Sorry. Thank you. Let's see if I can move. Okay. I don't mind. I'll sit down. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Council. So a lot has happened in the last 2 weeks that I'd like to update you on with Sound Transit. We in fact, were served today by Sound Transit. We expect it to be challenged by them, and in fact, that did happen. There is a hearing this Friday at 1:30 p.m., so we are preparing for that. Also wanted to mention that the City Council has responded to Sound Transit, and that is something that was really in response to their letter to us regarding our filing a complaint. So that is something that will be made available. In fact, it should be in the packet. So if you have access to that, that's available. And then because we referenced in that Sound Transit letter a term sheet that we had this understanding with Sound Transit in March of 2016, that has also been made available to our community as well. Also wanted to mention we administratively sent Sound Transit a letter regarding their station building permit, and we consider that permit in an incomplete status as a result, of course, the moratoria. In addition, last week I was invited to present at the Chamber, and I really appreciate the Chamber. Thanks, Lori, for inviting me to attend that meeting and discuss with our community I-90. And then, of course, this evening you had a public hearing on the moratoria. So going forward, Representative Claiborne wanted me to notify you and let you know that she has plans to meet with the governor this week. In addition, I will be meeting, starting a series of meetings where I am consulting with citizens about this issue, strategizing with them, really trying to get as much feedback, input, and of course ideas as we can from our community. And as I said, we, going forward, will prepare and respond to the legal challenges that we fully anticipated. Likewise, going forward, the Planning Commission will prepare ordinances for you to consider later this summer, and then also recently was invited to attend the East Side Transportation Association to update them on I-90 as well. Our community has asked us how can they help, and in fact we will plan to provide our residents with names of elected officials to contact, as well as talking points that they can use. We'll make that available. We're still finishing up the talking points, and we'll make that available in the MI Weekly that goes out on Wednesday, and of course on our website and social media platforms. So I really appreciate those residents who have contacted us personally saying, hey, what can I do to help you? So this is something we'll make available this week, and frankly it's been a challenge to sort through who of those large list of elected officials makes the most sense. So in consultation with our lobbyists, I think we have a good idea of who our residents should reach out to. So we'll make that available by Wednesday. And with that, any council questions?
Thanks for the update. It has been a busy couple weeks, and I'm sure we've got more to come. One of the questions that consistently comes up from the community, and I would even say within the region and on the council too, is that of safety. The safety issues with police, fire, emergency vehicles, being able to access the island, being able to leave the island, and or traverse across the various bridges, east and west. Can you comment about how you and our public safety officers are going to be taking feedback, comment, and providing, again, insight and perspective more broadly?
Yes, in fact, I heard that same sentiment when I hosted the community meeting back in January. It definitely, it is a serious concern. And so, in fact, I've been consulting with our fire chief and police chief, and our fire chief is certainly working with our partners on the east side. As you know, we are a small island, and we only have 2 engines, so it's challenging when there might be more than one significant emergency response. So we have mutual aid agreements. So obviously those jurisdictions are very much concerned about how those mutual aid how we are going to help each other, especially with the changes being proposed for I-90. So our chief is on that and working with our partners in the region on those issues. Usually when there is a accident on 90, our fire department is called out to respond. So our chief is also looking at those issues. So not only how can we make sure the response is adequate for our residents on the island, but we are also concerned about how to respond on I-90. So there's a couple of things there that our chief is looking into. Our police chief is very much concerned about, so there's, so Sound Transit is studying really traffic congestion impacts. As noted by our resident this evening around Town Center, the congestion, the backups, those types of impacts. Sound Transit has been studying those impacts. And that is one, those level of service is certainly one area we're very concerned about. But our police chief is also concerned about other impacts. So we're labeling those public safety impacts. So impacts to pedestrians, bicyclists. We have a lot of bicyclists that use West Mercer Way. We have a lot of peds in our town center, and we'll have more when we have light rail stations. So we are very concerned about those things. So our police chief is looking at those issues and weighing in on those issues. So I would say it is one of our top concerns, and we want to do everything we can to address that concern, hopefully sufficiently with our community. And that'll be something I'll be bringing up as I meet with residents as well. Again, consulting with them on their ideas for how to address the concerns to their satisfaction.
Other question? Jeff?
Yeah, I just want to strengthen up. I mean, you're talking here sort of off the cuff on the public safety issue, but it is super top concern, and I think we need to have a plan to come back in 2 ways. One is, I thought we were going to have some kind of public forum, not just with the few, but with the many, to come in and talk and present our plans. What if there's this emergency and that emergency? And secondly, to develop the set of ideas that we can go to, you know, if we get back to discussions on mitigation, for additional resources on this island funded by our friends at Sound Transit and WashDOT to compensate for the fact that we will be, you know. So I know that Chief Heitman is thinking through a bunch of those things. I would love to have, let's say, a study session here where, you know, at one of our meetings we get to present that to the citizens, and to have, I thought you had a plan for a public input session on public safety, because this is a top issue.
That's right. It is something the staff has been planning. I think we want the time to be ripe for that, and we want to be sensitive about that, especially with the litigation. So it is something we'll plan to return to, either or both, really, a study session and maybe a separate community meeting about that. I think part of our challenge is really identifying, this is where I'd like more of the one-on-one meetings with citizen, is identifying appropriate mitigation. So obviously using the expertise of our public safety staff, but also, again, meeting with our residents to talk through some of those possibilities as well.
Benson?
Julie, in your presentation you mentioned that there's a hearing scheduled for this Friday at 1:30. Do you know where that's going to be? Because there may be some residents who have the interest and the inclination to show up.
Thank you, Councilmember Wong. Yes, we will make that once we find out it's going to be downtown, so carpool, and it will be most likely, I'm assuming, at Superior Court, so downtown. And then also, we will make available for our residents, so you don't have to dig around for it, on our website, the Sound Transit response. So their writs will also be available on the city website, so you can see that for yourself as well.
All right. Other questions? Wendy?
Julie, I just want to thank you for all the community outreach you've been doing. I've heard you speak at the Chamber. I've heard you speak to the PTA Ledge Council. Keep up the great work, and I know that PowerPoint presentation you provided at the Chamber was really well received, and if we could make that available online for anybody who didn't see it or who wants to use it to have their own information and be able to share with their friends and neighbors, because surprisingly I still run into people that don't know the center roadway is closing, and they understand the lawsuit but don't really know what it's going to do, so we still have sort of some level setting to do for a lot of residents who might not be as plugged in as others.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And in fact, I welcome anyone who wants me to meet with them. If they have a small group of neighbors they want me to meet with and talk about this issue, I welcome any of that. I think in some ways it's just, I can get at more of the conversation, deeper issues when it's smaller group. So I really appreciate that when residents are open to that. And also, I am considering a mailer of some kind to our residents, because I am astounded by how many residents still are not completely aware of everything that's gone on. In fact, they're often shocked to hear that we're planning for the center roadway to close on June 1st. So so I'll be working with our staff to look at doing something like that.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we'll wrap up that agenda, Bill. Thank you very much for that, Julie. Yeah, let's go ahead and call a 5-minute break, come back at 9:06, and so we're in recess for just a few minutes. Meeting will return to order. We're going to move now to Agenda Bill 5241, Outdoor I-90 Sculpture Gallery name change. And I was just told Kai is introducing Aaron. So, welcome.
And I'm the Special Events and Cultural Arts Coordinator for the Parks and Recreation Department. I'm here to introduce Erin Vivian, a member of our Mercer Island Arts Council who serves as our Public Art Chair. Erin is here to present the proposal for the Outdoor Sculpture Gallery name dedication.
Hello, like Kai said, I am Erin Vivian, and I am the Public Arts Chair on the Arts Council, and I'm here today to present our proposal to dedicate the outdoor gallery in honor of Greta Hackett. Yay. What is the outdoor gallery? I'm sure you've all been there. It's the strip of land along Sunset Highway between 77th and 80th Avenue Southeast, where pieces of the city's permanent public art collection and pieces for sale are located. A portion of the proceeds of the sales of these pieces goes to benefit the Arts Council's public art program. Brief history. Mercer Island was, in fact, the first community in the state to adopt a comprehensive plan including parkland, trails, and the incorporation of artwork into public life. And it was in this spirit that the idea for the sculpture gallery was born. With the widening of I-90 and construction of the lid in the 1990s, the city saw an opportunity. It envisioned enhancing the open space created by the corridor and complementing this unique landscape by providing positive public art experiences for a broad audience. To accomplish this, the city aimed to cover the entire 2.5-mile strip of I-90 running through the city with sculptures, water parks, and trees. The centerpiece of this endeavor was the gallery. It was the brainchild of community member Greta Hackett, who, after visiting similar galleries and sculpture gardens abroad, felt a park here on the island would not only enhance the aesthetic of the town center and bring more art to the public, but would also enrich the island's sense of community. Greta's efforts, along with those of a citizen Artway task force, culminated in the opening of the gallery in 1995. Since then, it has fulfilled Greta's hopes and become a notable space, an important anchor of culture within our town center, and a point of pride for the community. In 1997, in recognition of the gallery, the Arts Council received the Pacific Northwest Regional Arts and Humanities Award given by the National Recreation and Park Association. Examples of past sculpture sales include Island Poles by Stephen Jensen, which was purchased and donated back to the city and now resides in our permanent collection. Rotating Rings by Bradley Jones, which was sold to a private individual. And Gnome Group 3, purchased privately but continues to reside in the gallery. It serves as a gathering space for events such as Art Uncorked, National Night Out, and the Summer Celebration Parade staging. And it currently houses 17 pieces, seven of which are part of the city's permanent collection. So why is it important to dedicate the gallery? The Arts Council is currently focused on efforts to invigorate the gallery. As our town center is built up around it, it's important to continue to highlight this significant piece of community culture. The Arts Council has committed to this revitalization in a number of ways. We've started the process of procuring new and more modern signage for the gallery's sculptures. We will be using the gallery as an anchor for self-guided walking and bike tours of the island's permanent art collection. And we're working to install new and exciting sculptures to the gallery, including a significant piece by island resident Ingrid Lottie. Through this work, it became clear that the gallery did not have a strong and established name. In fact, wherever we looked, it had a different name. For example, in various sources, it's referred to as the following. And as you can see, there's a run on a theme, but none of these names truly reflect our community in a meaningful way. Having a stronger and more consistent identity will highlight the significance our community places on the gallery. So, why Greta? In a brainstorming session regarding the name of the gallery, Jane Brom, the Arts Council City Council member liaison at the time, and arguably one of the most knowledgeable community members on the island's history, suggested dedicating it in honor of Greta. Greta Hackett, a former Mercer Island Arts Council member, was the driving force behind the outdoor gallery. The gallery was indeed her idea, and she chaired the Arts Council's Outdoor Gallery Committee for several years. She was a very active community member. In 1996, the Mercer Island Rotary Club awarded her the highest honor of the Paul Harris Award. She served as PTA president at all 3 levels in the Mercer Island schools. And she worked on several school levy campaigns. She was an active board member of the Mercer Island Community Fund. Greta's concept of bringing community together through art is realized in a sculpture donated to the city in her honor by her husband, John. In 1998, he gifted the yearling to the city, and it was installed near the Aubrey Davis picnic shelters. This sculpture embodies the spirit of her vision. As you see here, on the left is a photo of her 2 granddaughters with the sculpture, and on the right is actually a photo of my son. Coincidentally, this was the first sculpture we encountered when we moved to the island almost 3 years ago, because it's near our house. And it was way before I knew about Greta, and even that an arts council existed. But it really impressed me that the island placed such an importance on the arts that it put art in parks right next to a baseball diamond and a playground. And later it was part of my inspiration to apply to join the Arts Council. And Elliot, who was 4 at the time, was really tickled to find a deer in the bushes. I told him to not feed the deer, but he doesn't always listen to me. And clearly, Greta's vision is still alive and relevant to the community 19 years after her passing. Dedicating the gallery in her name would formally recognize the legacy she began. So why now? Why is this so important and relevant now? Our little town is currently facing big challenges. It's a time where small reminders that our community is defined as more than an island a freeway runs through are valuable. It's indeed the people that invest their time and efforts into our community that make it great. While the gallery is located parallel to I-90 and was born from a project that coincided with the timing of its expansion, it's not otherwise associated. Dedicating the gallery, the Greta Hackett Outdoor Sculpture Gallery, will formalize our town's goal of humanizing our community spaces and celebrating those citizens who devote so much effort to our civic objectives. Including the dedication in the Arts Council's focus on this important cultural asset will help ensure it does not get lost in the shadows of our town center and transportation development. And honoring Greta in this way would acknowledge the city's appreciation of its history, tradition, and foremost, its citizen spirit. I've also incorporated a few words from one of her family members to support the dedication. I don't know.
Please come up to a microphone. You could come to the podium here if you like.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, council members. My name's Joan Wold, and I'm proud to say that I'm Greta Hackett's daughter. I moved to the island with my parents, John and Greta Hackett, and my 2 brothers in 1974, and I've pretty much lived here ever since, except for 4 years when I went to the University of Washington. My mom first visited Mercer Island as a young girl, taking the ferry over to go to the Terrywood Girl Scout camp on the south end of the island, which I later went to for humanities block at the high school. And I think that she always wanted to live on the island after that visit. She really fell in love with the beauty of it and just the serenity here. My mom loved art. She herself was an accomplished cellist and a painter. And she loved being outdoors, whether she was in her garden or hiking in the mountains around or out sailing on the Sound in our region with my brothers and my dad and me. She also strongly believed in community. That was an ongoing theme. She was a volunteer in almost everything that I was involved with. She was a volunteer in the schools. As Erin mentioned, she was a volunteer with the Washington Parks Arboretum. She was a master gardener and chaired many of the tree sales that they had. She worked with the Seattle Symphony on various political groups, and this led to her work with the Arts Council on Mercer Island. And one of the first events that she helped with, appropriately enough, was the Mostly Music's in the Park. And she would be very excited about that. And I think that often she would find herself down at the offices of the Mercer Island Reporter trying to, drum up excitement for that also. The idea of the outdoor art really intrigued her, and she'd heard of a gallery in San Diego which she went to visit. It was in Balboa Park, and it was called The Art of the Open Air. And she was so excited about that she found another place to go see in Hakone, Japan, the Open Air Sculpture Garden. Both of these wonderful places inspired her. She thought that it would be a wonderful thing to bring to Mercer Island. And she was also very committed to having it be a free place where people could interact with the art. And Erin and I didn't even know this until I was sending her pictures, but one of the reasons that my family donated the yearling was because she really liked the interactive aspect of it. So the walking through it and seeing it, but also touching it and having it be a part of the walk. And she would have loved that her granddaughters were playing on it, and she would have loved that brought you into being part of the Arts Council. I know that she showed some of the pictures from her trips to the City Council at that time when they were trying to establish the art sculpture. See, I don't even know what it's called. The sculpture park on the lid. And she also really loved the idea. My mom was very thrifty, and she loved the idea that we could bring in these beautiful pieces of art, and the artists would have a place to display their art and possibly sell it, and the city would benefit by getting to enjoy it while it was there. And so it's a win for everybody. The Hackett family would be honored that Greta's life and interest in creating an open sculpture garden on the I-90 lid, and that it may be honored by naming it after her. My dad wished that he could be here tonight, and he was planning to come, but he threw his hip out hiking around his new home up on the Kitsap Peninsula. He's 86 years old, and he just said it's a little setback. So, but he wanted me to relay to you his thanks for considering Greta when naming the sculpture garden. Also, can I introduce some of my lifelong friends that came in my support? Kelly Togeson, her mom, Nancy Excel, and Janice Porter Lyon. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the Arts Council thanks you for your consideration of our proposal and would very much appreciate its approval. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Questions for Erin? Benson.
Thank you for your presentation. Is there, you plan to have a plaque or some sort of name? How is that going to be identified at the park?
We hope to place a new sign there, similar to other signs that we have at other parks around the island.
Do you know where's that plan to be located, I guess? I'm just curious. Has that been thought through yet?
Diane Mortensen, Recreation Superintendent. There's currently a sign there that has the name of the gallery, one of our blue signs, and we'll replace it. It's kind of by the Public Art Chaise Lounge sculptures in the middle of the gallery.
Other questions, Wendy?
So this is probably more of a question for Bruce. I'm curious how many other parks or benches we honor residents with, or the residents ask for, and I mean, what is our policy around naming of public places or infrastructure?
Bruce Fletcher, Director of Parks and Recreation. I found a very old policy. I'm not sure from what era. I probably should have brought that with you tonight. When we did Aubrey Davis, actually Rich Conrad led the charge, and that did make it in the notes. But that's the only one that I've been a part of at the city.
The other one was Ferolia Field.
Oh, I'm not sure if there's any paperwork on that one.
Well, there's a sign.
There is a sign. Gary Ferrolia was the parks director.
No, and there's
years
also a
ago.
playground, right? Named after my person who used to own my house. I
But
think.
Bruce is hoping that sets a precedent, 'cause he wants like Pioneer Park to be named Fletcher Park.
Other questions? No? Okay, Aaron, thank you very much for the presentation. Bring it back to the council for perhaps a motion and discussion. Jeff?
Yeah, I've moved to approve the I-90 Outdoor Sculpture Gallery name change to the Greta Hackett Outdoor Sculpture Gallery.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Jeff, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, this actually predates my work. It's really Jane and the Arts Council. Ann Toothill is here as well. She's the chair of the Arts Council. Thanks for coming. Again, this is something that I'm persuaded by the fact that there's so many names for this, and she was the founding mother of this gallery. I think it's a very worthwhile thing to do.
All right, other discussion? Seeing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much to all of those who were participant in that. It's a nice thing to have happen. All right, we're going to move to Agenda Bill 5263, consider Parks and Recreation Department name change. Bruce Fletcher again.
Well, name changes seem to be an easy thing around here, so we'll start with this one. Good evening, Bruce Fletcher, your Director of Parks and Recreation. And we heard a lot about arts, but arts have a long and rich history here on Mercer Island and with the Parks and Recreation Department. The City Council directed staff to investigate name changes that reflect the arts and bring back some potential name changes with a new title. So that's what I'm doing here tonight. We looked at a lot of cities and interviewed my staff for suggestions, and a few potential titles came up are Parks, Arts, and Recreation Department, Parks, Arts, Recreation, and Community Services Department, Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Service Department. Those are just a few names that we came up with. At the planning session, I spoke of the large cost of change of all department signs. It was suggested, though, at the Parks and Rec subcommittee to look at doing a slow rollout if a new name was selected. So that's what we did. What is a slow rollout? That approach would be done with a minimal budget impact by immediately, if a change happened, all electronic names would be updated at no cost, of course. Current department letterhead and business cards would be used until we exhausted them, then we replace them with the new name. City and department websites, of course, would be changed. And all signs would be replaced when they need replacement. So it wouldn't be automatic. It would be when that sign's life is done, it's time for a new one. Of course, that will take many years. Of course, the name change is certainly the City Council's decision, and so I wanted to include a few options for you to consider. Number one, the Mercer Island Mercer Island Parks, Arts, and Recreation Department. Number two, this came up by staff, keeping the name that we have now, but adding a tagline below it, something like celebrating community, parks, arts, and recreation since 1960. And that was just one idea that came up. And of course, number three, as your agenda bill dictates, is staying status quo, no name change at all. And number four, as council and policy leaders, if you want to come up with a new one, that's up to you. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, but would be needing to seek direction for potential name changes for the Parks and Recreation Department.
Thanks, Bruce. Councilmember questions?
Thank you, Bruce. Can you just give an overview of all the many services the Parks Department does? It's youth, it's seniors, it's respite, it's preschool,
Yeah, we do a lot. The open space, the trails, aquatics, it goes on, and of course you can't mention all that, but if you go through our brochure, you can certainly see all the activities that we currently do.
Benson?
Sorry. So Bruce, in the agenda bill, the figure of $60,000 is in there, but that is for an immediate change.
Yes.
So if you do a slow rollout, what kind of cost are we looking at?
Very minimal, because once a sign has to be replaced, we do it within our budget. However, currently I don't know if I have any signs that need to be replaced. The biggest thing is just getting used to a new name. You know, you answer the phone for so long, but it's minimally. There was a talk about someone said administratively it's a nightmare. We're not that huge, and I've been in part of name changes before. Years ago, I worked with Olympia Parks and Recreation, and that was the biggest thing. They changed it to Olympia Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Service Department. It took a while, and then they changed it again after I left to Olympia Parks, Arts, and Recreation. But back to your question, we would do it within our a lot of budget that we have now, because electronically, so many things go out electronically. We can do that instantly.
So it really won't change the organizational structure, how you folks operate?
No, I mean, the arts, is, like I said, have been around Mercer Island for a long time, and we're proud of that. It wouldn't change a different structure at all.
Jeff?
I just want to verify, I mean, in the agenda bill, it says in soliciting the ideas, staff recommendation was to keep the department name unchanged.
Correct.
Is that the case? I mean,
Correct.
I know it's there, but
Yeah,
I'd like to hear a little color commentary on
just, you know, we did a kind of a survey, and at a department staff meeting, I explained there's a potential change. So I said, spend some time and send me back your feedback, and I got via email, and mostly I got to keep the name the same. But I had a few creative that didn't have the arts in it, so I didn't include that. And you know, change is very difficult for some people. And the younger you are, it seems like change is okay. Anything can happen day after day. But it was a pretty big impact of no, keep it the way it is.
But I'll tag on it. Any concrete reasons that were raised for not changing?
A couple were just, you know, kind of like we do so much when trails and open space, and why pick one thing out, that feeling like the recreation encapsulate all that. So and I think some of it was just the feeling of why change it. What's the reason? And because we feel like we do a lot of arts within our department now, so.
Okay.
But a lot of it, I think, you know, it is change, Bruce, and it's tough for some people.
Wendy?
And recreation is a broad category. I also want to ask how many other cities have arts in their parks and rec name. I mean, a citizen gave us this list, but I don't see parks, arts, and rec. I see cultural services. I see community services. How?
Yeah, I didn't do a broad search. I just around here, Auburn has that name, as well as Olympia, but that's the further I've gone. So it's not huge, but there are some out there.
Other questions? Okay, Bruce, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Looking for a motion, I guess.
Okay, well, I'm confused because it says recommendation. It doesn't say motion on the agenda bill.
All right.
So I don't quite know what that means in terms of the...
What's our process at this point?
What we're doing.
So the way I wrote it was, since it is a policy decision, I was looking for direction from the council where to go.
So I can give it to you in the form of a motion.
That's fine.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move that we provide direction to the Parks and Rec director to change the name from Parks and Recreation to Parks, Arts, and Recreation Department.
Second.
Moved and seconded. As the maker of the motion, you get to speak to it first.
Thanks. This came up at the mini planning session last year, so there's not the same degree of tape in the archives that would cover some of the discussion that took place there. So I feel like a little bit of history helps. The reason that I brought this up was the sense that arts is an important and an imperative part of this community. And as much as it does sit in the current charter, as much as there is arts in the programming, that there is a recognition, I think a growing recognition, of the role that arts plays for every person and for that what they call 360-degree person. And my intent was to raise the awareness in the community, to raise the awareness in staff, and to raise the awareness here in council, that just as we can talk and have conversations about supporting play fields and open space and beaches, that we equally need to be having open and frank conversation about supporting the arts, be they in parks, be they in buildings, be they wherever you want. This was not intended to be a specific Parks to Arts initiative. So that was the reason that I brought it up initially, and I would remind council that the majority of council did agree with the name change and directed staff to come back, which is where we are now. That within the Parks Subcommittee, the agreement I believe that we did have multiple times was that it not be at undue effort or expense to the department, recognizing that this isn't a time to be spending significant funds. And the third part, it was very interesting to me when I was thinking about, okay, how do you make this tangible? Why this is important, at least to me, was I went and I took a look at the list of tens of drafted projects that could be put forward to the community in the form of a bond. Now, granted, this was draft, and this was put together by staff, by community members, by certain subset of the council members. And there's a category called arts and community. And on this list of tens and tens and tens of projects, and I did not count them, but I'm only on page 3 at this point, there were only 2 that called out the arts. And that was Luther Burbank Amphitheater, which was given a Tier 2 importance, and the MICEC Multipurpose Room, which was given a Level 3 degree of importance. And I was surprised, because in my mind that spoke volumes, that we can look at spending potentially millions of dollars in vetting these projects with the community. They were all to be vetted through a community input process. I think Tom Acker referenced that. But that we only could come up with 2 of them. And so one of the questions in my mind was the Arts Council queried? Were they asked what projects they would put on that list? Because I would be surprised to see only 2, and I would be surprised to see them with a priority of only 2 or 3. So to the point that was raised earlier tonight, this is about creating a stronger and more consistent identity where arts is a part of the community. It's about celebrating arts everywhere that we go, and it is the small reminders that our community is more than a pass-through. So that is why I'm advocating this. And I would hope for the consistent support as expressed last June tonight insofar as the name change.
Okay, others? Wendy?
I didn't like the idea when it first came up. I still don't like it now. I don't think we're a pass-through community. I think arts definitely has a place in our community. I think it's well supported through our Parks and Rec department, through our citizens, through the school districts. I feel like changing the Parks and Rec name is a mouthful for staff, for us, for other cities that have Parks and Rec departments. I'm struggling with the inconsistency there. Staff doesn't recommend it. The money, the change, whether it's a slow rollout or an immediate one, it seems like it's an unnecessary priority to be looking at now. And I feel like we don't really need to be worried about arts being elevated in our community. I feel like we already have that. Parks and Rec is Parks and Rec. It's open space, it's recreation, it's swimming, it's soccer, it's arts, it's kids' playgrounds. It's everything we do for the recreation and enjoyment of our open spaces and the programming that we have for all our citizens. So I respectfully disagree. I'm sorry.
Dan, and then Benson.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly support this. And Debbie was very articulate in her comments on it. I'm not going to even try to duplicate that. Yeah, I think all of us who've lived in this community for a while recognize how important the arts is. I mean, whether it started with Mr. Ferguson back in 5th grade teaching our kids how to play in the band and going to all Island Band Night and all the music programs that we have that our kids went through, and I'm sure most families' kids interact with our music programs, whether it's Youth Theater Northwest and those of us who were at the gala on Saturday night. Just so impressive to see what our kids do and how talented they are, and it just in terms of painting, in terms of sculpture, and it's that transcends, that goes beyond our kids. Arts is an integral part of our community, and it's important that we acknowledge that in what we do and not just say, yeah, well, we serve the arts, but we don't have to give it the kind of emphasis that we give recreation or we give parks. Well, as Nancy said in her testimony, arts makes a difference. And for a lot of kids, it is huge, and for a lot of seniors, it's huge because that's what they want to do in this community is enjoy the arts. So whatever we can do to make it clear that we as a city are fully behind the arts, and particularly something like this, which is at zero cost, because everything that's going to be done is going to be done as things wear out anyway or are used up. This is a great chance for us to say, we are capable of making a change, and we are capable of recognizing as a community that the arts make a difference, and not to be embarrassed to do it and not to be intimidated to not do it. I think this is exactly the type of thing that is, we've gone through so much as a council in the past few months where we have been dealing with very difficult issues. This is one where we can really feel good about and say we recognize how important the arts is for our community, and this is a way that we demonstrate that we recognize it.
Benson?
I've struggled with this a little bit. I've talked with a few of the council members. I think what was helpful is just to make it clear that if we do the slow rollout, there's a minimal cost, of very nominal cost. I think it is a reflection of our values. All of us have talked about how important the arts are to the community. I certainly believe in that. And I think it's also a way to elevate that whole discussion and recognition of the value of arts. And so I will support it. I believe that, again, it may take the staff a little time to get used to it. It may take the public a little bit of time to get used to it. But I was actually struck by the prior agenda bill, because actually in the discussions by the folks about the changing of the park, they, more than once, they talked about the interaction of art and parks. So that was actually kind of interesting. I don't know if it was planned, but it was kind of a interesting discussion and comments. And so, there is a definite relationship between arts and park. And so, again, I think I'm going to go ahead and support this particular motion.
Jeff?
I'm going to end up being in a very weird place here because, first of all, I'm the Arts Council liaison. I am library board. Both are under the Parks and Rec Department. Been on the Symphony Board, big supporter of the arts. But I don't believe in making this change at this time. I think, it feels wrong to me at this point. The arts, we do tremendous amount on this island. I want us to keep doing it. Parks and Recreations is the standard name. We moved to Public Works to do that and make a standard name change. I don't see the compelling reason, given all that we have to do, to change the name. So even though it looks like it's Wendy and I'm voting against it.
Yeah, it's over to me. I prefer not to be the deciding vote here. no one, I haven't heard anyone here, and I would be quite surprised if anyone else were to say, oh, no, arts don't matter to us. Arts matter, and you can see that throughout the community with many things that happen here, and so it's not a question of whether arts matter. It's, to my mind, it's a question of whether names, whether you need to capture that in the name, and whether in so doing you change something, and in a way that you want to change it. My sense is that this name change takes a pretty clean, simple name that I think captures what it needs to capture and turns it into a more awkward mouthful. And for that reason, I'm not thrilled with it. Bruce, mentioned staff's reticence about this, or that some staff members were reticent about this, and of course I don't want to read in my own thoughts to what their thoughts might be, but it seems that might be part of what's going on for them too, is just that Parks and Rec rolls off the tongue. Parks, Arts and Rec feels like it's gotten kind of awkward and longer. I particularly don't like the idea of spending a lot of money to do this quickly. I become less negative about doing this slowly, but I'm left at the sort of okay, but why, and without feeling like I've got a compelling reason to go forward with this. I don't recall, to Debbie's point that the council previously supported this. I don't recall what my position was at that time, but so I can't speak to whether I'm changing my view or not. But I'm going to vote against this and suggest that it's sufficient to just leave the name as is at this point. Okay, so back to you.
Well, there's a phrase, unconscious bias, which is used in many contexts in our current society. And I think we're all very quick to support sports. We're all very quick to support public safety. And it's not that those aren't important. But we're not so quick to support the arts. And when I look at a list that was generated that has but 2 arts projects, I would speak to a degree of unconscious bias. The intent in raising this issue and changing the name is to bring the importance of the arts forefront in people's minds when they think about the services that our staff not only delivers, but prioritizes. When I look at the MICEC multipurpose room, we made a commitment well over a year and a half ago when we repurposed the adult art classroom to a preschool that we would work really hard to find that group another space. Now, granted, there's been some challenges, but I've heard not a word about it in the last 6 to 9 months. Where's that project on our list? What arts facilities does the city maintain for its kids, for its adults? We temporarily, or so I thought, repurposed a room for preschool, but it's dropped off the radar. That's an example of why I think it's important. And whether it's a mouthful or not, we can all get used to something new. I mean, I have to be honest, I think that's kind of a weak justification. But that's why, is because I think arts needs to be raised to the forefront in people's minds. It needs to be raised to the forefront in our minds when we are budgeting, when Parks and Rec is budgeting, when we're prioritizing the time and effort that goes into the various works of the city. So it's probably going to land in a tie, which means it won't go through. Dave did support it at the planning session, but unfortunately he's not here tonight.
When we had a tie situation during the budget process, we just pushed it off to the next meeting, which I think is appropriate this time as well. There's no reason for this to end up in a tie. And when I think Jeff was the one who was not here, and we ended up on some 3-3 votes. and we pushed it off till he could get back. So I would think, so I would move to table this in consideration of what we did last time until the next meeting when we have 7 people here, hopefully.
Parliamentarian, is it?
Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay.
And you need to now vote on the amendment. Or the motion,
tabling.
or I'm sorry, on the tabled motion to move it forward to the next meeting.
Okay, so we're voting now. This supersedes the original motion and becomes a motion to table, and the tabling is for a set
Till the
set
next
period
meeting.
of time?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and I do normal discussion? There's no, it's not like...
It's just like any other motion. So yes, the council can discuss it and then needs to vote.
Okay, so is there any discussion of this? Dan, I guess you get to go first as the person who's tabling it.
Yeah,
you already sort of did.
Yeah, I
Go
just
ahead.
did. I mean, this is what we've done before. We have 3-3. And out of respect, and hopefully that the same respect we showed Jeff, he would expect us, we would show David and let him vote on this. He's as much a council member as the rest of us. This is there's no reason to do 3-3 things. If we've got, we should get this decided once and for all, and not walk away from this meeting knowing that there is a 7th council member. And I have no idea how he's going to vote, because he may change his mind the way someone else has changed their mind. So I haven't talked to Dave about this. I have no clue what he's going to do.
Wendy.
I have to say, we have other priorities. We have a procedure. Are we going to hold lots of votes because someone's not here? I really feel like we've talked about this. I'm sorry Dave's not here. 3-3 is the process. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen.
Others?
I mean, obviously, I support putting it off until the next council meeting. If for no other reason, it's not. This is not a tremendous time burden, given everything that we spend on sound transit, everything that we spend on everything else. I'd say we minimize the discussion in 2 weeks' time, and we have a full council vote. And if it passes, it passes, and if it fails, it fails. But at least then it won't have died for a draw, which to me seems kind of crazy, but okay.
All right. I'm just going to point out that I would hope we would be consistent in calling for this sort of thing rather than doing it to suit our own purposes. And Debbie, I'm looking less at you than I am at Dan, who I think you would do well to remember this in the future when something is going to go the opposite direction for you, and I will call you on that. All right, all in favor of tabling this, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
So it gets tabled until our next meeting on a 4-2 vote. Okay? All right. We move now to Agenda Bill. I don't know. I've lost my paperwork here. Agenda Bill 5262, Code Amendment adopting MICC Chapter 2.50 pertaining to accepting donations, second reading.
Good evening, Mayor Bassett, Deputy Mayor Bertlin, members of the council. My name is Carrie Sand. I'm your city attorney, and right now we are passing out hard copies of a revised version of proposed ordinance 17C-07, and I'm sure there will be discussion about that. But the draft that was in your council packets is revised based on feedback received at our last meeting discussing this matter on February 21st, 2017. During that meeting, there was direction given by the council to revise the language of the ordinance so that there was a $10,000 threshold for non-monetary donations, and also language that would require council approval for any donations that had restrictions that were not city budgeted expenditure items. So those would go back to the council for approval. It also was revised to appropriately acknowledge and express appreciation to those making donations to the city of Mercer Island, and to authorize the city manager as appropriate to promulgate policies and procedures to encourage and facilitate the making of donations to the city. And just as recently as today, there was some email exchange, email traffic with various members of the council and myself regarding further clarifications that were suggested to add greater clarity to the intent of this. So that's what you've got before you in hard copy format. And it is self-evident, but for those that don't have the benefit of the hard copies in front of them, I just wanted to quickly review. So in section 2.50.020, acceptance of donations, under subsection A, monetary donations, there's language clarifying that city council approval shall be required for any monetary donation made with specific terms or condition outside of a city budgeted expenditure. In B, non-monetary donations, there's language added that says if the non-monetary donation will be promptly converted to cash that will be used for a city budgeted purpose, then the city manager shall notify the council of his or her decision regarding the disposition of such a donation. And the council will have the right to reverse that decision if it so chooses. And for all other non-monetary donations, those will need to go to the city council for approval. So hopefully that clarifies that. And that concludes the presentation. Hopefully accepting donations is made easier going forward, even though this was a little bit difficult of a process getting to this point.
All right, council member questions? Looking for a motion then.
I'm sorry, I just had a question. The legal committee, such as it is, had one disagreement, and I guess I'd ask Julie how she would operate with this sentence. It's on the top of page 3, I guess it is. It says, the city council shall have the right to reverse such decision by the city manager if it should so decide. So this relates to non-monetary contributions, donations of less than $10,000. I'm just, my gut feeling when I read that was that your reaction to that would be that you would just come to the council for everything under $10,000 as well as everything above $10,000 to find out whether the council is going to reverse your decision. But I was just curious how you would deal with that as the city manager.
Well, I would mostly be guided by the statement or in C. So in other words, if it's inconsistent with your policies, your direction, your plans, that kind of thing, that would be guiding my thoughts about whether to accept or decline. So I would be naturally looking to the council direction on all of that. So I don't really see a conflict here.
It's not a conflict. Just a question whether you would ought to. I mean, the way this was, I thought we had set it up last time. Was under 10,000, it's up to you. Over 10,000, it was up to the council. But then this sentence was put in here, which relates to the under 10,000, and so I'm curious whether that would drive you in the first instance to just, no matter what the dollar amount, to come to the council, or you would. I mean, that was my concern, that we basically put something in there which sort of took away the idea of saying it's up to you under 10,000. And that Benson and I disagreed about this, so I should let Benson.
Yeah, obviously I'm the one who inserted that language. And, the way I envisioned it, obviously if it's under 10,000, I mean, you're still coming to the council and just notifying the council, telling what your decision is. And it's only if the council, for some reason, decides, well, wait a minute, that may not be the right decision, or we may have an issue with it. But I would think that most of the time, when the city manager comes to the council and says, with respect to these donations that were under $10,000 or under, more than likely, we're going to, we'll just say thank you for the notice and go with it. But I just thought that'd be prudent to have some sort of override, just in the event that the city council, for some reason, decided that we differed with the city manager.
Well, just keep in mind, how are you thinking of doing that? Like, it would be on consent? I mean, everything we take to council is overhead. It's administrative. It takes work to compile. Not that we're opposed to it. It's just, do you really want everything under $10,000 to come before you for really approval?
No.
Is that,
it was just a notice. It was,
a notice.
Yeah. We definitely changed it from recommend.
Yeah. So do we, I guess I'm learning still, do we not notify the council when our residents are so generous and donate things? I mean, do you know? Oh, yeah.
No one tells us anything.
Well, Allie says we don't get a lot of donations. That's the reason.
I just wanted to add, from a practical standpoint, this idea of notice that Councilmember Wong brought up, I think the effect of that would, to default, have the city manager bring everything forward. And based on the conversation at the meeting on the 21st of February, I thought the idea was to have this bright line threshold of 10,000, so below which it could be made more administratively simple and efficient. However, with two council members giving me competing directions about this, I wanted to lay it at the feet of the council. But that said, I just wanted to remind you about sort of the efficiency that was trying to be achieved with under 10. And then, if we have a trend of getting more donations, wouldn't that be fabulous? Then perhaps we include those in the accounts payable reports under like a separate category of donations. So then you know that they are happening. That's just a suggestion, just a thought. But
my intent was not to make it more difficult, because I was backing away from this recommendation language that was in there. I didn't like that language, and so I changed it simply to a notice provision. But and then Dan obviously had a fair response as far as questioning the efficacy of that. So
well, and I guess my only concern about that is, especially if the council chooses to go in a different direction, I've already told whatever I've declined, or it does cause some timing issues potentially.
No, I was just going to say that, in terms of reporting, first of all, just a shout out praise, your weekly report is excellent. And so I don't have as long an experience with city managers as some of my colleagues, but it's wonderful compared to what I've read in my previous 14 months here. And that's a good place to say, hey, we got a big donation this week. So we have a weekly vehicle that she communicates out to us, and I would suggest that's a good place to start messaging about this.
I'm happy to take it out, Dan.
Okay, in that event,
I'm just going to scoot back out of the way.
I'm with you on that.
I would move to adopt.
I couldn't care less on this one either. So
let's hope we get some donations.
Yeah, this is we get paid the big bucks for making these. So I would move to adopt ordinance number 17C-07, establishing a new chapter 2.5020 MICC pertaining to donations, but deleting the sentence from 2.50020B, which reads, the city council shall have the right to reverse such decision by the city manager if it should so decide.
Council, we are going to simply state as amended, because the version you have in front of you is not the version that was put out to the public.
Okay.
So we note the changes, we'll make sure the final version has it, but the motion will just state as amended.
Okay.
Discussion. Legal team, you're okay with this?
We're bookended by it.
Yeah,
I think we should retain outside counsel to give us advice.
More importantly, Carrie, are you okay with this language?
Yes, I'm okay with the amendment.
All right. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, we are done with regular business. We're going to move to other business. Councilmember absences. Councilmember Wiesentiner is in Singapore, I understand. So somebody care to... Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Planning schedule. Julie, would you like to speak to us about that?
Mayor and council, just wanted to notify the public that we have scheduled the executive session this Thursday morning to discuss litigation. In addition, I wanted to get council's input on whether or not you would be agreeable to hosting a study session on March 20 to talk about your rules and procedure. So this was an item that I believe was part of your planning session last year. And so there has been a lot of work on that document. But it's really time to bring it back to you and ask you where you want to go with it. Because I believe there was a council subcommittee on that. And so it's really time to bring it back to the full council. I will say, because of timing, I myself will make some suggestions that'll be new to that as well. So is that something on March 20th, 6 to 7, you would be agreeable to?
Sure.
Okay, great. We'll have that
It's
item.
something we've been meaning to do for more than a year, so.
But
think
the body of the work, I'm not the principle, yes.
Yes, we'll.
Can I just make a comment about something I discovered the other day? The city of Kirkland allows 3 comments per topic, pro and con. I thought that was an interesting process limit.
And public comment is on there, so we can talk about that.
All right. Okay, so yes, let's do it. Anything else on planning schedule?
No, that's it.
Okay. Council members, planning schedule? All right. All right, board appointments, we have none.
Actually, can I ask one thing that struck me when we were talking about the moratoria? Something that I think the expiration is something around August 11th. So does that mean in the event that we were to need to extend, that we would need to land that on the planning schedule for July?
Yeah, City Manager Underwood asked that I add all those dates to the planning schedule after we produce this. So it is on there as a if needed, both of the moratoriums if it needed to extend.
Okay. And then just a small kind of footnote to that is Dave and I have both changed roles at Microsoft in the last few years, yet I will still be absent at the final meeting in July. I don't know if he would be or not. But if we were to need to take action and it would need a supermajority or anything, it may be that there's only 5 council members here for the second meeting in July. But I haven't looked at calendars. It's
We do have an August 7th meeting. So that's where I have tentatively put the moratorium extension if needed.
Okay, council member reports. Dan?
Nothing.
Debbie?
Nothing.
I'll be quick. Dave and I have switched some assignments. He's now the Open Space Conservancy Trust. I'm doing the PTA Legislative Advisory Liaison because it's hard for him to make day meetings, and I had conflicts with future dates, so that works out perfect. And in that schools mode, April 25th is the School Foundation Breakfast. You're probably all being recruited to tables or maybe running a table, but it's Tuesday, April 25th for the Mercer Island School Foundation breakfast.
Wendy.
Our own Cindy Goodwin, Youth and Family Services Director, is hosting a community meeting on the 15th of March around effective parenting. And it's, I think, going to be a great presentation and a speaker and dialogue.
Benson.
Well, the audience is not here, but I think we should do a shot. Well, thank you, excuse me, thank you for sticking around. But just wanted to really say congratulations to the Mercer Island High School girls basketball team for winning state, and so that was quite an accomplishment. And so I did attend the Councilwoman Balducci talked a little bit about it, about the West Point incident, and so the only other information that I received when I went to the King County Regional Water Quality Committee meeting was that the staff of the wastewater division thinks that they will have in 2 or 3 weeks an idea of how long it will take to repair the facility, plus a better idea of the cost. All they can tell us right now is it's going to be over $25 million. But
$25 million?
Yeah, well over $25 million. And but luckily, most of it may be covered under insurance. So that was sort of the good news. So, and that's basically it. So.
All right, and for myself, no report. With that, we are, unless there's anything else for the good of the order, adjourned. Thank you.